What would you do if your life depended on collecting coins from the very people who would rather see you hung from the nearest tree? Would you laugh? Scream? Or simply run? Welcome to the shadowy world of medieval tax collecting, a ruthless job where the only thing more dangerous than your ledger was your own skin. In a land where peasants barely scraped by and lords wielded power like a sword, tax collectors walked a tightrope over a pit of boiling pitch, and one misstep could send them tumbling into oblivion. The ink on your parchment blots the blood of the desperate, while your very presence ignites fury hotter than dragon fire. Imagine entering a village where every face twists into a mask of hatred at the mere sight of your dull, black cloak. You're not just a collector, you're the harbinger of doom, a grim reaper in a realm where coins are currency but life is barter. As you approach, the children flee, the dogs snarl, and the elders cast curses behind your back like darts aimed at your heart. You think you can escape with bags of silver sheen? Think again. Each coin is a death sentence, an invitation to violence, a spark ready to ignite a rebellion. With every knock on a door, every scratch of your quill, you risk being the headliner in a bloody tale of revenge. The villagers whisper your name with venom, while shadows thicken around your brittle bones. You're the comic villain in their tragedy, the punchline to a joke only the gallows understands. Picture this: a drunken lord, his belly as bloated as his ego, orders you to squeeze every last coin from a farmer already teetering on starvation. Make them bleed, but don't spill a drop of blood, he bellows. Laughter erupts among his sycophants, and you nod, heart racing as the weight of his command sinks in. Who's the real monster here? You become a puppet, strings pulled by those who sit high and mighty, while you dance into the jaws of a wolf. What happens when the villagers rise? When pitchforks become weapons, and torches burn brighter than your ambition? You're not just an agent of the crown, you're a target, a pinata stuffed with gold and grief. They'll want revenge, not reason. The gallows loom like a dark cloud on the horizon, imminent, inevitable. You want glory? Forget it. The only crown you'll wear is one made of thorns, bloody by the hands of those you betrayed. No amount of gold can buy your freedom from the curse of your role. The truth bites harder than any sword, it whispers in your ear, taunting you to flee or fight. So ask yourself again, would you dare don the cloak of a medieval tax collector? Or would you choose a life where survival means more than coins? Welcome to a world where every coin has a story, and your fate hangs by a thread, fraying with every collection you make. The real question is, can you handle the stakes? A chill skittered down my spine as the sun dipped below the jagged line of the city's crumbling wall, its final rays bleeding into the cobblestones like spilled ink. The shadows danced, long and twisted, mocking the figures they cloaked in gloom. I remember the air thick with dread that night, every breath laced with the scent of damp earth and the acrid tang of fear. It was not the kind of night meant for revelry, it was a night that clung to the soul, whispering dark promises beneath the veil of festooned banners and flickering torches. In the heart of this bustling town, the marketplace was a tapestry woven with shouts of merchants and the cries of children, but all of it felt like a distant echo. I remember the moment it happened, when the grim figure of the tax collector emerged from the shadows like a wraith. His eyes, cold as winter's breath, swept over the masses, searching. Searching for what? For those who owed. For those who would feel the weight of his ledger pressing down upon their chests. I remember the hush that fell, a shiver racing through the crowd as if each heart had skipped a beat. Henry. The tax collector. A man caught in the web of his own making. I always thought him a tragic figure beneath the layers of his grim facade, a man driven by obligation, but also by fear, fear of the lord who commanded, fear of the townsfolk who loathed him. I remember the glint of sweat on his brow, the way his knuckles whitened around the handle of his ledger. He was both predator and prey, a bloodhound in a world where every scent led to a fresh wound. And then there was Elsbeth, the widow with a spirit as fierce as autumn winds. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands trembling as she clutched her son. Her eyes, wide and glassy, seemed to plead with the heavens for deliverance, or perhaps for a moment, a distraction from the gnawing hunger that clawed at her insides. With every step Henry took closer, her breath quickened, a staccato rhythm drowned out by the cacophony of the marketplace. I remember her voice, raw and desperate, calling for justice, justice that felt as far away as the stars themselves. "Please," she whispered, but it turned into a gasp when Henry approached, his ledger thick and foreboding, like the weight of a grave. The crowd recoiled, shadows overlapping in a grotesque ballet, as they sensed the storm brewing. What was it that thrummed beneath their skin? The pulse of anger? The desperate hope that they could turn back the clock, that they could erase the debt that chained them to this life of servitude and sorrow? Henry stopped before Elsbeth, the ledger between them a chasm that felt insurmountable. I could almost hear the thought swirling in his mind, was it a flicker of sympathy? A moment's hesitation? He had seen her at the market before, the way she bartered for scraps, her pride and resilience etched into her very being. But now, as he looked into her pleading eyes, I remember the moment his wall crumbled, just a crack, the tiniest sliver of humanity breaking through the ice. "Your taxes are due," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, strained as he faced the fury of the crowd. A whisper that felt like a death knell, echoing through the marketplace. And yet, beneath that gravel, I could sense the tremor of fear, his fear of retribution from the Lord, his fear of the wrath that would fall upon him if he showed leniency. The townsfolk shifted, shadows blending and separating like the tides of a restless sea, unsure whether to lash out or cower in silence. "Please!" Elsbeth's voice cracked, desperation clawing its way through the air. "I have nothing left." She raised a hand, trembling, as if she could push back the tide of despair that threatened to drown her. "What will become of my child?" Henry's gaze flickered, caught between two worlds, the cold steel of duty and the warmth of compassion. I remember the moment it happened, the split-second choice that would seal his fate. Should he meet her gaze? Should he risk the scorn of his master for the spark of humanity within him? Around them, the crowd leaned in, hearts pounding like war drums, breaths held in a collective gasp. I remember the palpable tension, the air heavy with unsaid things, a silence that screamed louder than the clamoring market. Fear twisted in their stomachs, they all knew the role of the tax collector, the ghost that haunted their lives, a spectre of authority that could strip them bare of their dignity, their hope. "Do not ask for mercy," he choked, a ghost of a man caught in a cage of obligation, his own heart shackled by the weight of the world. "I am but a servant, the servant." Elsbeth's voice cut through the darkness, raw and unyielding. "What kind of servant takes from the needy, leaves the hungry to starve?" Every word was a dagger, each accusation a crack in the armor he wore. "You have the power to change this." And there it was, the glimmer of defiance, a spark in the dark. Would Henry yield? Would he become a mere instrument of oppression, or would he rise against the tide? I remember the moment the air shifted, a whisper of fate brushing against all their lives. The weight of the ledger, the weight of choice hung between them, and with it, the weight of history itself. It was a confrontation woven together by desperation and power, a dance of shadows that would echo through time. As the sun set, the city cloaked itself in darkness, shadows lengthening, the heartbeat of the crowd synchronized with the pulse of the cosmos, each note a reminder that we are but players in a grand, unforgiving theater. And so, the story continued, a thread woven into the fabric of medieval life, where the roles of tax collectors blurred with the lives they touched, where fear and hope intertwined like lovers in the dark. The clock ticked onward, each chime a reminder of the relentless passage of time, while the ghosts of decisions past whispered the tale of those who dared to confront their fates. The night hung heavy with promise, and the weight of the ledger still awaited its reckoning. A child's laughter echoes through the empty streets, a haunting contrast to the heavy brooding sky, pregnant with the promise of storm. The child darts past, a blur of dirty linen and wild hair, feet barely touching the cobblestone, innocence unclaimed by the world's cruelty. But behind that laughter lurks the spectre of something darker, a tax collector, a figure in a cloak, counting coins in the shadows, tallying the price of survival. And just like that, the air thickens, pulsating with a choking tension, a reminder of debts unpaid, of lives weighed against the scale of greed. I remember the look on the face of Marcus, a farmer, weathered and wise, eyes like storm clouds, dark and foreboding. He stood at the edge of his field, weary hands trembling, a shovel clenched like a weapon against the weight of the empire. "One more coin, just one more," he whispered to the wind, as if it could carry his plea to the gods. He had nothing left to give. His harvest, a meager handful of grains, mocked him, shimmering in the sunlight like dreams crushed under the boot of oppression. And then there was Elara, a baker's daughter, with flour dusting her hair like powdered dreams. Her laughter, once a melody in the marketplace, now tangled with worry, whispered through the corners of her crumbling home. She watched her father, hunched over like an old tree, every coin a dagger thrown into their dwindling hopes. "What do we owe?" she would ask, her voice a candle flickering in the suffocating dark. "When will it end?" But there was no answer. Only the relentless ticking of time, reminding them that every moment was another moment taxed by fate. In the shadows, the tax collector moved like a ghost, his presence a spectre of dread. He would wear a mask of indifference, his fingers deft and calculating as they stripped the very fabric of survival from those who bled into the soil. I remember the icy dread that gripped the heart of the town, an invisible hand reaching into their chests, squeezing until breath became a luxury. The cries of mothers, the wails of children, each sound a note in a grim symphony composed by desperation. "Your crops, your livestock," he would say, his voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. "What you have is not yours. It belongs to the crown." And with every word, he carved deeper into the souls of the townsfolk. They were nothing more than pawns in a game played by kings, their lives weighed against gold and silver, their worth measured in tax receipts. The streets grew quiet, the laughter of children faded, replaced by the heavy, shuffling feet of despair. I remember watching Elara knead the dough, her fingers working the flour as if it were the only thing left in the world that could provide comfort. Each heartbeat echoed the rhythm of her labor, a desperate attempt to create something from nothing, to feed her family, to keep the shadows at bay. But shadows have a way of creeping in, of seeping through the cracks, whispering that all her efforts might be in vain. "Do you think they care?" she would ask her father, voice trembling like the last leaf on a winter branch. "Do you think they see us?" The baker, with hollow eyes and a heart burdened by the weight of his debts, would merely sigh, a sound that hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Every year, the taxes came and the town braced itself, a collective inhale before the inevitable exhale of despair. I remember the restless nights, filled with the echoes of hollow laughter and the cries of the children, dreams turned to ash. The clock's hand moved with an eerie precision, each tick a reminder that time waits for no one, especially not for the desperate. And then, when all hope seemed lost, a spark ignited. Marcus, emboldened by an unquenchable thirst for change, gathered the townsfolk under the dim glow of torches. "No more," he roared, a lion awakening from slumber. "We are not mere shadows. We will take back what is ours." The air crackled with energy, electric and raw, a moment suspended in time, a heartbeat shared collectively. Elara stood in the back, heart racing, caught between fear and exhilaration. "What if they come for us?" she whispered, but the fire in Marcus's eyes was contagious. The very essence of rebellion breathed life into their weary bones. "They can only take what we allow them to take," he proclaimed, and in that moment, hope mingled with defiance and something deeply human stirred. The spectre of taxation morphed into a battleground, and they were not just victims, they were warriors. As the winds of change howled through the streets, they made their way to the heart of the town, voices rising in a crescendo of unity. "We will no longer be silenced." Each word was a hammer striking the anvil of oppression, shaping a future forged in the fires of struggle. The tension rippled through the crowd, a palpable force, thrumming like the strings of a long-forgotten lute. But then came the storm, not of clouds but of guards, cloaked and armored, their eyes cold as the steel they bore. Fear gripped the hearts of the townsfolk once more, a tightening coil that threatened to snap. I remember the silence that fell like a shroud, broken only by the clatter of swords drawing from sheaths, a heart-stopping symphony of impending chaos. Marcus stepped forward, every ounce of courage summoned, a lone candle flickering in a tempest. "We demand justice," he bellowed, words slicing through the tension, cutting deeper than steel. Elara held her breath, the world narrowing into a single moment, the space between hope and despair thinner than a blade's edge. The guards advanced, shadows stretching long and menacing, a reminder that the past still loomed, heavy with the weight of chains. "You think you can defy the crown?" their leader sneered, voice dripping with disdain, but the light in Marcus's eyes burned brighter. I remember the moment suspended in time, hearts pounding like tribal drums, the air thick with anticipation. This was the clash, the embodiment of struggle against the oblivion of silence. And as the first sword clashed against the first shield, the sound echoed across the ages, ringing through history, promising that the evolution of taxation was not merely a tale of despair but of resilience, of defiance, of life forged in the fires of conflict. The scene unfurled against the backdrop of a world in turmoil, as a new chapter awaited, an evolution that would not be written in gold or silver but in the blood, sweat, and tears of those who dared to challenge the shadows. The tension hung heavy, a cloak woven from the fabric of human spirit, as the confrontation loomed, threatening to carve its mark on the very soul of time itself. The clock on the wall ticks ominously, each second like a hammer striking a bell, resounding through the cramped room. I remember the moment she threw down the eviction notice, the paper crumpling under the weight of her despair. Anna's face, pale as a ghost, illuminated by the flickering light bulb above, captured the raw intensity of fear. It was a suffocating silence, thick with the weight of unspoken words, as the threat of land tax loomed over her, a monstrous shadow creeping into her life, threatening to swallow her whole. "I can't lose this place," she gasps, her voice trembling like a leaf in an autumn wind, and I feel it, my heart thudding in my chest, echoing her pain. The walls surround us like a prison, adorned with peeling paint and remnants of laughter that now seem like cruel ghosts. It's not just brick and mortar, it's a history, a home. I remember when her daughter, Lily, would dash through those halls, laughter ringing like bells, innocence untouched. Now, the echoes are fading, replaced by the dread of an impending auction, a haunting finale to a life woven with memories. Lily stands by the window, her small frame silhouetted against the dim light, eyes wide and uncomprehending. A child shouldn't carry such burdens, yet here we are, trapped in a cycle born from harsh realities, the land tax, a silent predator stalking its prey. "It's not fair, Mommy," she whispers, and her words slice through the air, sharp and unyielding, a painful reminder of the unjust weight resting on Anna's shoulders. I remember the day I first confronted the specter of taxes. I was young, naive, standing in line at the DMV, feeling like a part of a grotesque theater, where everyone was both actor and audience. Each person ahead of me shuffled through a ritual of defeat, the poll tax hanging over us like an executioner's sword. I watched as shoulders slumped and sighs echoed, the mundane agony of a bureaucratic dance. The light of the overhead fluorescents cast a sterile glow on faces etched with worry, and I couldn't help but feel the crushing irony. We were all bound by invisible chains, the weight of our household burdens palpable, a shared suffering veiled in the monotony of daily life. "Do you remember when we thought taxes were just a joke?" I ask Anna, my voice light, attempting to pierce the heaviness in the air. "Like, the government needs my money for what, exactly?" She gives me a fleeting, sad smile, a momentary crack in her armor, and in that instant, I see her youth, a bold spirit, unafraid of the world. That was before the burdens of property taxes made her heart heavy, before the nights spent calculating numbers that never seemed to add up. But there's a darkness lingering just beyond the surface, where the sales tax rears its ugly head, a relentless phantom that haunts every purchase. We're all complicit in this tragic play, caught in a dance with the devil, where each transaction is an offering, an exchange steeped in a history drenched in betrayal. I remember standing at the checkout line, the cashier's eyes glazed over, mindlessly scanning items that represented our lives, the fruits of our labor, the small joys we clung to, now subject to the invisible hand of taxation. $1 for this, another for that, she mutters in a monotone, as if reciting a dirge. And Anna, oh, Anna, her hands tremble as she reaches for the wallet that feels like a stone in her pocket. "Every penny counts," she murmurs, the frantic whispers of her thoughts spilling into the air like broken glass, sharp, unforgiving. But where does it all go? The question hangs, a heavy fog, suffocating in its silence. I see her struggling against the tide, the weight of expectations pressing down like a leaden cloak. She's not just fighting for her home, she's fighting for a future, a glimpse of hope that threatens to slip through her fingers like grains of sand. "Do you think they care?" I ask, the bitterness rising in my throat, tainting the air between us with acrid resentment. "All they see are numbers. Just numbers." I can feel the anger surging, a reckless fire igniting within, because this isn't just about taxes, it's about lives unraveling, dreams shattering against the cold wall of reality. Each dollar paid is a small death, a ritual sacrifice, and all around us, we see the ghosts of those who couldn't make it, bodies lost in the maelstrom of financial ruin. Lily's small voice cuts through our whirlwind of despair, fragile yet resolute. Can't we just not pay? It's a child's plea, innocent yet tinged with the despair of knowing that her mother is in a battle she can't comprehend. Can't we just tell them no? Her wide eyes shine with defiance, and for a moment, I wish I could wrap her in a cocoon of safety, shield her from this cruel world where the weight of taxes becomes a whip cracking against the backs of the weary. But Anna's face hardens, the reality crashing in like waves against jagged rocks. Sweetheart, that's not how the world works, she replies, her voice a fragile whisper, cracking under the strain. A tear rolls down her cheek, a testament to the internal war she's waging, a fight against despair, against the odds that seem stacked higher than the mountains. The pain is palpable, a living entity, wrapping around us like smoke, threatening to suffocate the flickering light of hope. The night drags on, the shadows lengthening as if they too are drawn into our turmoil. I glance at the clock, its hands moving slowly, mocking us with each minute that passes. This isn't just a reckoning of numbers, it's a confrontation of our deepest fears, the idea that we might lose everything, that the world could strip us bare, leaving only echoes of laughter and love in its wake. Time feels suspended, like a heavy fog lying over the city, and I realize with a chilling grip that the battle against these taxes, a land tax, a poll tax, a sales tax, extends far beyond mere sums on a piece of paper. It's an unfolding story of survival, of heartbreak, and of an unyielding desire to reclaim what is ours. Anna's breath catches in her throat as she wipes her tears, tired but resolute. We are not just spectators in this theater of life, we are players, fighting back against the faceless entity that seeks to consume us. She turns to Lily, determination hardening her voice. We will fight. Together. I can feel the spark ignite in the air, a dangerous and beautiful flame flickering into existence. And in that moment, I remember, this isn't an end, it's a beginning, the first heartbeat of a new revolution against the oppressive weight of taxation. The shadows loom large, but we will rise. Together. The sound of a knock reverberated through the dimly lit room, a hollow echo that seemed to summon shadows from the corners. I was sitting there, heart racing, breath shallow, peering into the depths of my own despair. How many times had I felt that dread? A chill crawled up my spine as I remembered the day they came for my father. It was another day like today, grey and dismal, the sky dripping with impending rain. The tax collectors were relentless, their eyes cold and calculating, gears of the machine of government turning without pity. They arrived like wolves, sharp suits disguising sharpened teeth, their smiles as false as the promises of the leaders they served. Their whispers could slice through flesh, drawing blood from the hearts of the innocent. I remember the panic in my father's eyes, the way they darted, searching for escape in the narrow confines of that rundown cottage. I remember his voice, trembling yet defiant, I can pay. Just give me time. But time was a luxury the collectors did not grant. Claire stood beside me. She was fierce, a rebel wrapped in a veneer of hope, yet even she couldn't mask the fear that flickered in her expression like a dying candle. We can't let them take everything, she whispered, each word laced with a venomous determination. Her hands, though calloused from years of toil, trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. I could see the storm brewing in her green eyes, the fear of loss battling the desire to fight. Collecting debts, they called it. But there was nothing lawful about it. It felt like a ritual, a dance of shadows and light where the dark always triumphed. The flickering light bulb above us buzzed ominously, like a warning. The collectors didn't just take our money, they stripped us of our dignity, leaving our souls naked and exposed. You owe, you pay, they'd chant, their voices flat and devoid of humanity, raking all semblance of compassion away with each syllable. I remember the last time we met one of them, a man named Victor, his smile so wide it could swallow the sun, yet his eyes were two barren pits of greed. You can't escape what you owe, he said, a sinister thrill in his voice. The words hung in the air, heavy like a fog that cloaked the city. Those words dug into my mind like nails, relentless and unforgiving. As he stepped closer, I could smell the sharpness of his cologne, a sickly sweet scent that masked the rot of his soul. Claire's breath quickened as she stood her ground. "You don't understand what you're doing," she shot back, her voice shaking but fierce. I could feel the fire in her heart, yet it was a flame flickering in the wind. "We're not mere numbers on a ledger. We're people." The silence that followed was deafening. It suffocated us, a blanket of dread draping over our hope. Victor tilted his head slightly, a predator sizing up his prey. "People don't matter," he said, his voice cold and smooth. "What matters is the coin you owe. Everything else is collateral." I remember the lump rising in my throat, the feeling of despair twisting my insides like a knife. How could he reduce us to mere transactions? How could he take away our humanity with a single phrase? I glanced at Claire, her eyes shone with unshed tears, reflecting the flickering light as if they were stars fighting to shine against a darkened sky. That night, as I lay awake, the ceiling felt like the weight of the universe pressing down on me. I thought of the time they took our home. How they arrived like vultures, circling, ready to feast on the carcass of our dreams. I could still hear my mother's sobs, a haunting melody that echoed in the recesses of my memory. "We'll find a way," she had whispered, but the words felt hollow even then, a comfort that did not hold. I knew taxes were the lifeblood of society, a lifeline for some, but for us, they were a noose tightening around our necks. The collectors didn't just come for money, they came for our very essence, claiming our hopes as collateral. They didn't see our struggles, they saw only the numbers, the tallies on a spreadsheet glinting with the promise of power. In the dead of night, I found myself pacing. Shadows danced against the walls, mirroring the turmoil in my heart. Claire's voice echoed in my mind, "We have to fight back." But how? With what? There's a fragile line between survival and surrender, and I felt myself teetering on the edge. Then came the day they returned, their presence looming larger than ever, like a storm cloud ready to unleash chaos. Victor led the charge, a wolf among sheep, and I could feel my pulse quickening, the blood roaring in my ears. "We're not leaving without what we came for," he announced, his words like a drumbeat of dread. I caught Claire's eye. In that moment, a spark ignited, a yearning to take back what was ours, to stand and defy the cold, calculating machine that sought to crush our spirits. But doubt crept in, wrapping its tendrils around my heart. What if we fail? I thought, the question like a noose tightening around my throat. Yet, as Victor stepped closer, a glimmer reflected in his eyes, not just hunger, but something darker, a glint of satisfaction. "You think you can resist?" he taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are nothing but pawns in a game far larger than you." A moment stretched like a taut wire, the air thick with tension, and I felt time slip away like water through my fingers. I wanted to scream, to fight, to hurl every ounce of my pain back at him. I remembered my father's defiance, my mother's quiet strength, and I felt their spirits urging me to rise above the fear. In that moment, I saw a choice, a spark of rebellion that started flickering within me. I remembered the faces of those who had suffered, the ghosts of our past whispering to me in the darkness. "We are not just numbers," I said, my voice steadier than I anticipated. "We are people." And there it was, the beginning of a confrontation, an emotional climax that promised to shatter the silence. As tension thickened around us, I could hear my heartbeat resonating, each thump a declaration of war against a machine designed to erase us. The collectors, the numbers, the debts, they could not take our souls. In that charged atmosphere, with shadows swirling around us like specters of despair, I felt the weight of our histories, our dreams, our fears. I was no longer just a pawn. I was the storm itself, and the air crackled with the electricity of possibility. But would it be enough? Would we have the strength to fight back? The question hung in the air, heavy and potent, as I prepared to step into the light, ready to confront the darkness that threatened to consume us whole. The dance of shadows was just beginning, and I had no idea where it would lead, but I knew, deep in my heart, that I would fight to reclaim not just what was lost, but our very lives. And so, we stood, trembling at the precipice, the echoes of our ancestors urging us on, ready to face whatever the darkness would throw our way. The blade of the tax collector glinted in the moonlight, an unsettling promise wrapped in polished steel. It was a tool of desperation, a harbinger of despair. The alley was thick with shadows, the air heavy with a tension that hummed like a taut wire, threatening to snap. I stood there, heart pounding, as whispers snaked through the darkness, brushing against my skin like ghostly fingers. This was the night when debts would be settled, and lives would change forever. I remember the first time I saw Marcus, his back turned to me as he huddled over his ledger, pen scratching against parchment like a funeral dirge. The dim light cast flickering shadows on his face, a mask of concentration that hid stormy eyes. He was a man shaped by the weight of his vocation, collecting debts as if they were the stones pulling him deeper into a grave he couldn't escape. He wore his desperation like a shroud, and I wondered if he even believed in redemption. I remember thinking he was a ghost, too far gone to recognize the living. "Hey, Marcus," I called softly, as if raising the dead. "You awake in there?" My voice echoed, brittle and frail, shattering the stillness. He looked up, eyes wide with fear, the flicker of hope extinguished by the weight of reality. The tension coiling around us felt palpable, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to happen. "Daphne," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "what are you doing here?" His words dripped with challenge, but the tremor in his hands told a different story. I could see them, the instruments of his trade, arrayed on the table like a morbid display. A sharp-edged knife, used not just for cutting parchment but for severing ties, a heavy coin purse, bulging with promises broken and futures stolen, and a ledger filled with names, each one a ghost haunting him, demanding to be remembered. "I came to see what hell looks like," I replied, forcing a smile, trying to peel away the layers of fear coating my voice. "And it's not pretty, is it?" My laughter rang hollow in the night, twisted and dark like the shadows around us. I knew the weight he carried, the burden of collecting dues from people who had nothing left. I knew he wrestled with demons that clawed at his soul, and I wished somehow to pull him from this abyss. But the night wasn't done with us yet. A figure emerged from the darkness, Matthias, the enforcer, a man whose very presence was like a winter chill seeping into bones. His gait was purposeful, and the silence that accompanied him felt like the quiet before an execution. He knew Marcus was in trouble, and he thrived on it. I could taste the fear in the air, rich and acrid like burnt offerings on a pyre. "Marcus," Matthias said, voice low and dangerous, "you're behind again." The collector doesn't take kindly to excuses. I watched the flicker of panic cross Marcus's face, a trembling flame caught in a storm. "I swear, I'll get it. Just give me more time." His plea was a frail reed against a merciless tide, and I felt my heart clench for him. Time, what a cruel trickster. It slips through our fingers, leaving us grasping at shadows. Matthias stepped closer, the shadows stretching around him like a noose, tightening around all of us. "More time? Do you know what that means for you? For your family?" His eyes gleamed with a feral hunger, as if he fed off Marcus's dread. "They'll take everything. Your life, your soul. All for a few coins." I could feel the air crackling with possibility, the tension thick enough to choke on. I wanted to scream, to lash out. "Stop it!" I cried, the words spilling from my lips, raw and desperate. "You can't do this." But deep down, I felt the truth sinking in. This was how life worked. The threshold between right and wrong thinned until it vanished altogether. In this city, morality was a luxury few could afford. Marcus's gaze was a storm, battling between hopelessness and defiance. "I have a plan," he whispered, barely audible above the pounding of my heart. "I can repay you. Just give me a chance." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to cling to the idea that even in the darkest corners of despair, hope could flicker like a candle in the wind. But Matthias laughed, a sinister sound that echoed through the alley, shattering what little hope remained. "A plan? You think a plan can save you now? You're out of time, Marcus. You've always been out of time." And in that moment, I felt the weight of time pressing down on me too, a relentless tide that would sweep us all away. I looked into Marcus's eyes, searching for a spark, a flicker of the man I knew. But what stared back was a reflection of my own fears, mirroring the darkness threatening to consume us. "Please, let me help you," I begged, but my voice trembled, uncertain. What could I offer? A piece of my heart? A fragment of hope? It felt laughable, futile against the tide of inevitability. Matthias stepped forward again, his shadow swallowing the light. Help? You think you can help him? Look around, darling. There's nothing left to save. His laughter reverberated through the alley, a siren's call echoing off the stones. I closed my eyes for a fleeting moment, and in that darkness, I saw it all, the faces of those lost to debt, the ghosts of dreams abandoned in the alleys of despair, and the weight of a world that demanded payment in blood and tears. I could still feel the pulse of hope thrumming in my veins, but it was a feeble heartbeat, struggling against the crushing weight of inevitability. "Marcus," I said, my voice steadier now, infused with passion. "You can fight this. You can fight him." His eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition sparking between us. But before he could respond, before the weight of the moment could settle, Matthias lunged forward, the blade flashing in the moonlight, a streak of silver cutting through the darkness. And then silence fell, thick and heavy, as if the world itself held its breath, teetering on the edge of something unspeakable. The air crackled with a tension so thick it could suffocate. A single lantern flickered in the dark, casting grotesque shadows against the damp stone walls of the Lord's Keep. Outside, the winds howled like restless spirits, and inside, the heartbeats of men quickened with the knowledge that lives hung precariously in the balance. I could hear the shuffling of boots, the low murmur of desperate voices, but all I could focus on was the chill that ran down my spine as Sulver, the tax collector, stepped into the chamber, his face a mask of dread. He was not just a man, he was a ghost wandering between two worlds, the world of the lords above and the people below, a thin veil separating desperation from despair. "Master Garin is waiting," Sulver said, his voice barely above a whisper, each syllable dripping with trepidation. I could see the sweat glistening on his brow, a man who had spent too long in the shadows of power. He was the unwelcome herald of a bitter edict, taxes that could crush a family like a boot on a fragile flower. His eyes darted, searching for an escape in the rigid walls that held him captive. "We must go. Now." I stood rooted to the spot, a spectator in a theater of cruelty, my heart racing. What did we owe to Garin, the local lord, who ruled with an iron fist wrapped in velvet? The stories of his merciless ways echoed through the town like a plague, infecting every ear with dread. I remembered the last time the villagers had gathered, their faces pale and hollow, each one a reflection of fear, expecting the worst. They would listen, silent and resigned, as Sulver would announce new burdens while Garin's laughter boomed like thunder from his throne. "Why do you do it?" The word slipped from my lips, raw with unfiltered curiosity. I hadn't meant to voice the questions that clung to the edges of my thoughts like cobwebs. "You could refuse. You could fight back." Sulver's eyes widened, a flash of something, a flicker of hope or perhaps a hint of madness. "Fight? Against a lord? You don't understand. It's a game of survival. You play your part or you become another ghost in Garin's castle. Like the others." The unsaid words hung in the air, the others who had disappeared, who had spoken too loudly, too freely. Their absence was a haunting echo, a reminder that the stakes were as high as the gallows that loomed at the edge of town. "Come on," he urged, breaking the spell. I followed him, every step heavier than the last, each echoing footfall a countdown to something unavoidable. The walls of the keep closed in around us as we climbed higher, to where power and fear intertwined like lovers in a deadly embrace. Garin waited in the grand hall, a towering figure cloaked in shadows, his presence a symphony of dominance and despair. The flickering torchlight danced across his face, revealing a cruel smile that sent shivers coursing through my veins. "Sulver," he drawled, the sound slithering like a serpent. "Have you brought my tribute?" His voice was smooth, but beneath lingered a current of menace that made my throat tighten. Sulver hesitated, the word caught in his throat like a fish flopping out of water, desperate for breath. "The villagers, they can't pay," Garin interrupted, his tone flaring with impatience. Then they must learn. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with sinister amusement. You see, my dear Sulva, the common folk need a reminder of their place. We are not just lords by title, we are their fate. The room pulsed with a chilling silence, the kind that could swallow souls whole. I felt the weight of Sulva's gaze as he flinched, like a child caught in a storm. I wanted to scream, I wanted to shake him out of this twisted reality. But what could I say? What could I do against the suffocating power of a lord who wielded fear like a weapon? But then, something unexpected flickered in Sulva's eyes. It was defiance, a spark igniting in the darkness. No, he said suddenly, words tumbling forth. They've lost enough. Their children are starving. They've given everything, Garen. You're taking their lives. The room erupted, a clash of tension, a storm of rage and disbelief. Garen's laughter reverberated, but it was hollow, devoid of joy. And what of it? They are nothing but ants to be crushed underfoot, worms wriggling in the dirt. You, Sulva, must learn that loyalty and fear go hand in hand. Deliver the messages or meet their fate. Sulva's shoulders slumped, the fire extinguished, his resolve flickering like the dying flames before us. My heart ached for him, a tragic hero trapped in an unrelenting cycle, the tax collector forever entwined in the throes of his own making, pushed against the wall by the very man he served. And what of me? A mere observer, paralyzed by the gravity of the moment, eyes wide open, witnessing the cruel ballet of power unfold. As we turned to leave, the weight of Garen's gaze pressed upon us, heavy and suffocating. Remember this, he called after us, his voice echoing in the stone hall with a finality that felt like a death knell. They are sheep, and I am their shepherd. They will learn. Outside, the winds howled again, a mournful lament. I took a deep breath, the chill slicing through me like a blade. My heart raced, pounding against my chest, refusing to accept that this was how it would end. I looked at Sulva, whose face was a mask of defeat, and I saw the flicker of rebellion again. I remembered something ancient, something primal, the whisper of the oppressed rising up, the strength that hid beneath layers of fear. And there it was. The spark of a revolution, waiting, yearning. A fragile hope that danced just beyond the brink of despair. In that moment, I felt it, the thread that connected us, the people and the ones who wielded power. It was a delicate balance, a tightrope walk between survival and defiance, a dance where the music remained unplayed, but the notes lingered in the air like an unspoken promise. With every heartbeat, a choice was made, a silent vow echoed. We were not yet ghosts, not yet lost. The story would continue, spiraling through the shadows, entwining the tax collectors and the lords, the people and their oppressors, in a relentless cycle that never truly ended. It was a tale of power and pain, of survival and rebellion, a haunting melody that lingered long after the last note had faded. The distant wail of sirens shattered the silence, a mournful song that clawed at the air like a desperate plea. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced like specters across cracked pavement. I stood there, heart racing, pulse drumming in my ears, watching as the gathering crowd murmured, faces twisted in a mix of anger and fear. Somewhere in that thrumming mass, I caught sight of Marcus. His hands trembled, fingers brushing the stack of papers clutched against his chest with the same anxiety that rippled through the air. Just a job, he had told me, over coffee that felt more like a noose tightening around our throats, late-night talk dimmed by the flickering light of a single lamp. Just numbers, just forms. It's not personal. But standing there, watching him prepare to step into the lion's den, I could see the cracks in that facade. It was personal. It always was. The reputation of a tax collector haunted him, shadowy whispers trailing him like phantoms. Leeches, they said. Vultures. The words wrapped around him like barbed wire, cutting deeper every time he donned his ill-fitting jacket, the one he wore to disguise himself amongst the townsfolk. Each morning, he stepped into a world where judgments were cast, where eyes narrowed with suspicion, where every smile hid a dagger. I could see it in his trembling hands, the fear that lurked just beneath the surface, a fear that screamed that no matter how many forms he processed, to them, he would never be anything more than a monster in a suit. And then there was Sylvia. She stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed tightly over her chest, a fortress built from anger. Her brow furrowed, lips pursed as if she could physically hold back the tide of emotions that threatened to spill over. Once, she had been the sun, warm and inviting, drawing Marcus into her orbit with laughter and light. Now, she wore her rage like armor, each glance at him a shard of ice embedded in her heart. "You're not one of them," I whispered to her, as if my words could break the spell of her disdain. "You know that." But the ache in her expression told a different story. What could she possibly see in him that the world could not? He was a symbol of what she despised, a reminder of the system that had drained her family dry, leaving them to wither in the shade of financial ruin. "You don't understand," she hissed, voice low but sharp as glass, cutting through the turmoil. "He's complicit. He's a part of this." Her voice trembled, not just with anger but with the weight of betrayal, the kind that seeped into your bones and left you hollow. And yet, in this maelstrom of blame and anger, I saw the truth, a truth that twisted and turned, a labyrinth of misjudgments where even the heroes wore masks. The crowd surged forward, a tidal wave of resentment and hurt, and I felt my heart race, thrumming wildly as if echoing the tempest within them. Marcus stepped forward, shoulders squared, resolve painted across his face, but in his eyes I saw the flicker of doubt. He was not just fighting for his job, he was fighting for his soul. "I remember," he muttered under his breath as he faced the crowd, the words laced with desperation. "I remember when I thought this was about helping people." The shadows around him deepened, whispers rising in volume. I could feel the collective breath of the crowd, a sharp intake of air as they waited for something, anything, to break. And then it happened. A woman in the front row, her eyes filled with fury, hurled a crumpled bill at him, words laced with venom spilling forth. "You take our money. You take our lives." It was a shot, a bullet tearing through the air, and in that moment, the world froze. I could hear Marcus's breath hitch, the way it caught in his throat as every eye turned toward him. He wasn't just a number or an enemy, he was flesh and blood, a man battling ghosts not of his own making. Around us, shadows deepened, and the cacophony of voices rose, blending into a single, relentless roar. I could sense the tension crackling like static, a storm about to break. The weight of the past hung heavily in the air, a tapestry woven with threads of loss, of dreams deferred and homes lost. Each accusation flung his way was a dagger, each verbal blow a reminder of the lives he inadvertently impacted. I felt Sylvia's anger boiling over, a volcano ready to erupt. She stepped forward, eyes blazing like twin stars colliding, ready to unleash a storm of fury. "You don't get to just walk away," she shouted, voice echoing through the chaos, and I could feel the weight of her pain, the suffocating fear that gripped her heart. "You're the face of everything wrong. We trusted you." But as she spoke, I saw a flicker of something else in Marcus's eyes, a dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't a monster. That he too was caught in a system that twisted intentions and crushed dreams. The air shifted, and for a brief moment, the animosity faltered. "I remember," he breathed, his voice breaking as he faced her, vulnerable, stripped of bravado. "I remember when I thought I could make a difference." The sincerity hung in the air, heavy and electric, and I could see the shadows shift, the crowd moving closer, curiosity pulling them like moths to a flame. In that charged silence, the tension coiled tighter, gathering strength. Marcus stood there, a lone figure against the tide of resentment, and I could feel the heartbeat of the crowd sync with the rhythm of his pounding heart. We were all caught in this web, ensnared by our perceptions, our desperate need to blame and to find solace in the notion of right and wrong. The sirens faded in the distance, replaced by the soft rustle of papers, lives laid bare, decisions made in the cramped confines of dimly lit rooms. I could almost hear the ticking of time, each second stretching into eternity. The world seemed infinite, yet so achingly small, a cruel juxtaposition of hope and despair. And as the intensity hung thick in the air, I realized there were no easy answers. No neat resolutions. Just the raw, pulsing reality of human connection, messy, flawed, and achingly beautiful. Each heartbeat echoed the unspoken truth: we were all tax collectors in one way or another, wielding our choices like daggers, caught between necessity and morality, seeking redemption in a world that often forgot our names. As the scene unfurled, I felt the emotion surge within me: anger, confusion, a twinge of hope. The shadows loomed large, but within them, glimmers of light shone through, weaving a complex tapestry of existence, forever caught in the throes of perception and reality. The moon hung low, a sickly yellow eye in the sky, casting a haunting glow over the stillness of the village. I could hear it, the soft rustle of straw, the distant whisper of anxious voices mixing with the chill of the night. It was the kind of silence that thrummed in your bones, the kind that hinted at chaos lurking just around the corner. I stood in the shadows, breath caught in my throat, clutching the handle of my sword, its cool steel a reminder of the impending storm. "Do you hear that?" Elena's voice trembled beside me, a mix of fear and fierce determination. Her eyes darted toward the flickering torches lining the village path, casting long, dancing shadows that twisted like the thoughts in my mind. I remembered the way the peasants used to smile, arms filled with fresh bread and laughter. But today, their brows were furrowed, their fists clenched, and the air was thick with tension. I wanted to tell Elena it would be okay, but even the words felt hollow. I remember the first time I laid eyes on her, a wild spirit tangled in her own dreams, her laughter ringing like a bell in the still air. We were children back then, carefree, laughing at the absurdity of our world. But childhood had long since slipped away, replaced by the grim reality of our duties, our positions as guardians of the realm, caught in the crossfire of a war that felt both endless and inevitable. "Look!" Elena pointed. "They're gathering at the square." Fear pulled in my gut. The peasants had been discontent for months, whispering about hunger, about injustice, about the weight of the crown pressing down on them like a heavy shroud. They were restless, angry. They were ready to rise. I could feel the pulsing rhythm of their hearts, their collective fury crackling in the air like a distant storm. My heart raced, a wild drumbeat echoing in my chest. "We need to leave," I urged, but the words fell flat against the backdrop of rising voices, their chants, their cries for justice. I had seen the way desperation twisted hope, turning even the kindest souls into avenging spirits. I had seen it in my own reflection. Elena shook her head, determination solidifying her features. "People are suffering. We can't just turn away." A flicker of admiration sparked in me. She had always been the one to stand tall when shadows loomed, to fight when the world felt heavy. But bravery had its price. I remembered the tales, the stories whispered around fires of lordships falling, of heads rolling on cobblestone streets, of people, not monsters, becoming the monsters. "Will you fight them?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like an unspoken curse. I knew her answer before she spoke. "I won't fight them. I will listen." Her voice was firm, unyielding as iron. "But would listening save us? Would it save her?" My mind raced, images flashing like thunder in a stormy sky, faces I recognized, the warmth of home, the laughter of children now twisted into the angry roars of an oppressed people. The first yell pierced the night, a sound so raw, so primal, it shook me to my very core. "No more. No more taxes. No more empty bellies." The word sliced through the air, a blade cutting deep into the heart of the kingdom. I felt the weight of history, of oppression, of dreams dashed against the rocks of reality. I remembered the stories of peasant revolts, how quickly even the meek could rise to become the tempest. "Stay close," I whispered to Elena, but she was already slipping into the crowd, drawn toward the pulsing mass of bodies filled with rage and sorrow. "Elena!" I called, panic rising like bile in my throat, but she turned, her gaze fierce, embers of defiance flickering in her eyes. "Someone has to speak for them," she said, and in that moment, I saw not just the girl I loved, but a force, a whirlwind of emotions, a beacon in the gathering darkness. My heart ached at the thought of losing her in this sea of fury. The crowd surged, a wave crashing against the stone barriers erected by fear, and I felt the tide of bodies pulling me along, helpless against the current. The faces of the villagers twisted in anger and pain, eyes wide with desperation. I could see their stories written in the lines of their faces, the shadows of hunger etched deep into their skin. I remembered their laughter, the warmth of their fires. Then the torches flared, illuminating the anger, revealing the truth. It was no longer just a plea, it was a demand. They were not just fighting against the crown, they were fighting against the ghosts of their own despair. I could see it in their eyes, the hunger for change blending seamlessly with the desire for revenge. And there, at the center, stood Elena, small yet colossal, her hands raised toward the night sky as if to grasp the stars, to summon a miracle. "We are not your enemies," she shouted, her voice clear, piercing through the chaotic chants. "We want a future where no child goes hungry. Where laughter reigns instead of fear." But the mob roared, drowning her out, pulsing with a life of its own, a beast awakened from centuries of slumber, its breath hot with rage. My heart sank, the weight of the approaching storm pressing down on my chest like a suffocating shroud. I remembered all the stories that had ended in blood, in sacrifice. And as the night thickened, I realized this was not just a confrontation, it was an ignition. It would spark flames that could consume everything in their path. Even the love I held for Elena, fragile as glass, might shatter in the chaos. In that moment, I was caught between worlds, bound by duty yet desperate to save her from the clutches of the very people we had sworn to protect. I was a guardian, yes, but also a prisoner to my own fears. Would I be able to save her from the storm? Or would I have to stand against the tide of history, risking everything to save the one light that had kept me alive in this dark, suffocating world? My heart pounded as I pushed forward into the throng, desperation fueling my every step, the shadows of what was, what could be, trailing behind me like restless ghosts. The air crackled, tension thick, the night a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest risks come from the very people we think we protect. And as I reached for her, I knew that the real fight was just beginning. The night was a tapestry of shadows, the moon a ghostly spectator woven into the fabric of an unsettling silence. Rain drummed against the cobblestones of the narrow alley, its rhythm a countdown, a heartbeat that quickened with each drop. The smell of damp earth mixed with the metallic tang of fear, swirling around Thomas, the tax collector, as he stood at the mouth of the alley. A shiver crawled up his spine, a whisper of dread that gnawed at his insides. Every flicker of the gas lantern seemed to taunt him, illuminating the missed payments, the desperate faces of those he had come to collect from. I remember the first time I knocked on a door, he thought, his fingers tracing the edge of his ledger, the weight of it heavy with names. I thought I'd bring justice. I thought I'd make things right. His heart twisted as he remembered the hope that shimmered in the eyes of a widow, a hope he was about to extinguish. He was not the Grim Reaper, but tonight, he felt like one, an unwitting harbinger of despair. Across the street, beneath a flickering light, stood Clara, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribcage. She clutched her daughter's small hand, the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. The wind tousled her hair, a wild dance of chaos. She had seen Thomas, the man who came to collect what little they had left, and her breath caught in her throat like a blade lodged deep. "Not tonight," she whispered to her daughter, a prayer wrapped in desperation. "Please, not tonight." Each word was a fragile thread, binding her to hope. But hope was a fickle mistress, and Thomas was a man burdened with authority, the kind that glinted like a dagger in candlelight. He walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the stillness, an omen dressed in the guise of a man. She could see it in his eyes, the stone-cold resolve, the weight of the law resting heavily on his shoulders. He didn't want to be here, yet he had to be. The law is the law, he'd tell himself as if it could drown out the screams of remorse. "Your taxes are due, Clara," he called out, his voice steady, yet something trembled beneath the surface. The ledger felt like an anchor, pulling him into murky waters. "You know what happens if they're not paid." Clara's heart raced, a wild stallion trapped in a cage. "But I've lost so much already," she cried, desperation spilling from her lips. "I can't pay. I won't let you take my daughter." The words hung between them, heavy with a love fierce enough to battle the cold, indifferent grip of the law. Every syllable pierced Thomas like an arrow, twisting in his chest. Their eyes locked, vulnerability bleeding into the night, raw and unyielding. I remember my mother's face, he thought, a flicker of memory piercing the haze of duty. She had once been a beacon of warmth, but he had watched her fade, a victim to the very system he now upheld. "I don't want to do this," he murmured, though it barely escaped his lips. The shadows closed in tighter, whispering secrets of guilt and regret, taunting him. Is that supposed to make it easier? Clara shot back, anguish lacing her voice. Your pity won't fill my pantry or keep my daughter safe. Each word was a blow, the truth wrapped in bitterness, and he found himself stepping back, torn between his duty and the humanity he had nearly forgotten. As the rain intensified, a distant clock tower chimed, its voice carrying the weight of inevitability. The hour was late, and the world was unforgiving. In that moment, time felt suspended, a fragile glass teetering on the brink of shattering. The air crackled with tension, electric and alive, a collision of authority and desperation. Clara tightened her grip on her daughter's hand, a bulwark against the storm. I won't let them take you, she whispered fiercely. And she didn't know if she was speaking to Thomas or the threat itself, the voracious appetite of the system that loomed like a ravenous beast. Thomas, trapped in the snare of his own making, felt the walls closing in. He had become the embodiment of the law, yet in this moment, he was nothing but a man, a fleeting shadow cast by the flickering flame of his own conscience. Every coin I collect, he thought, every name I write down, it's a piece of me that I can't reclaim. He could feel it slipping away, the darkness clawing at his resolve. Please, he said, desperation creeping into his voice, understand, I have no choice. But the words felt hollow, an empty promise. The failure echoed in his chest, a cruel reminder of the limits of his power. The tax collector's authority danced like a flame, illuminating the faces of the crushed beneath it, yet he was powerless to change their fate. Clara's breathing quickened, a battle of wills unfurling in the rain-soaked night. She was a mother, fierce and unyielding, her love spilling over the edges like a raging river. You think you're safe behind that ledger, she spat, but every name you write down is a life you're breaking. You're not a monster, Thomas, you just wear its mask. And in that moment, he felt it, a crack in the armor of his resolve, a chink letting the light of humanity seep in. The realization hit him hard, like a storm sweeping across the night sky. What am I doing, he wondered, the question spiraling into the depths of his mind. What gives me the right? The rain fell harder now, as if the heavens wept for the pain shared in that alley. Each drop was a reminder of the lives intertwined, of the choices made under the weight of authority that often felt like a curse. Time ticked on, relentless and unyielding, like the beat of a drum echoing in their hearts. Clara's gaze pierced through the darkness, and for an instant, they were two souls adrift in a storm, desperately seeking shelter. You have the power to change this, she breathed, and in that moment, Thomas felt the gravity of her words, a whisper that crackled with the intensity of 1,000 storms. Thomas stood, a man caught between duty and the haunting echo of his own humanity. Shadows danced around him, taunting him with choices he had to make. In that heartbeat, he understood, his authority was a double-edged sword, sharp and unforgiving. The night stretched on, and the world around them faded into a blur, each heartbeat resonating with the weight of their choices. And as the rain poured down, relentless and cold, the convergence of their lives felt like destiny's cruel twist, a potent reminder of the fragility of power, of love, and the relentless march of time. In the darkness, they confronted not just each other, but the very essence of what it meant to wield authority in a world that often devoured the weak. The alley faded into obscurity, the shadows lingering like ghosts, echoing with the unvoiced questions that would haunt them both long after the night had passed. Time loomed, heavy and eternal, as the confrontation unfolded, leaving them suspended in a moment of choice, two souls grappling with the weight of their decisions, their fates entwined in a dance of light and dark. The air was thick with tension, a silence so profound it felt like a living thing, wrapping around us, squeezing the breath from our lungs. I stood in that dimly lit room, shadows dancing across the walls like ghosts of decisions long past. In front of me was Elias, a tax collector, his hands trembling as he clutched a parchment, the ink still wet with the weight of demands made in the name of God. It's not just money, he whispered, his voice cracking like thunder in the stillness. It's salvation. Or damnation. I remember the way the candle flickered, casting a warm light that seemed to mock the cold reality of our situation. I remember the scent of burning wax mingling with the musty odor of old wood, a dank reminder of the church's grip on our lives. Behind us loomed the figure of Father Samuel, his eyes dark and piercing, a hawk watching over its prey. The holy man had an uncanny ability to turn faith into a weapon, wielding it with the precision of a surgeon and the ferocity of a beast. "The Lord requires tribute," he intoned, words dripping with the righteousness of his conviction. To deny the church is to deny him. Elias flinched at the weight of those words. How many souls had been crushed under their gravity? I could see the conflict etched on his face, the way his brows knit together in a tapestry of guilt and desperation. He wanted to reject the tyranny of the church, to break free from the chains of duty, but fear held him captive. "I can't," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "What choice do I have?" But I saw the fire behind his eyes, a smoldering ember of rebellion waiting beneath the ashes of conformity. Maybe it was the way the flickering light caught the glint of a tear as it fell from his cheek, carving a path through the dirt on his face. It made me ache to reach out, to tell him that he was more than just a pawn in this game of shadows, more than a man with a ledger and a soul weighed down by tax and tithes. Father Samuel stepped closer, the scent of incense clinging to him, a blend of sanctity and rot. "You think the Lord is merciful?" His voice was low, a silky thread pulling tighter around Elias's throat. "Mercy is for the faithful. You are but a steward of his will. You know what happens to those who defy it." My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a caged animal, desperate to escape as I watched Elias wrestle with his fate. Outside, the night loomed like a black shroud, stars glimmering like distant, indifferent gods. I could almost hear the whispers of the townsfolk, trembling in their homes, knowing that failure to pay would bring the collectors to their door. I remembered old Mrs. Greaves, her frail body quaking as she handed over her last loaf of bread in tears, praying for mercy that never came. We were all caught in a web spun by greed and piety, each thread a consequence of our choices, our faith twisted into something unrecognizable. "Elias," I said, the sound of my own voice startling me, "this isn't right. They use faith to control us." My heart thundered, each beat echoing like a drum in the stillness. The world spun around me, and the weight of injustice hung heavy in the air, filling my lungs with bitterness. "You can change this. You can change?" Elias interrupted, his voice rising, raw and laced with anguish. "What can I change? My life is forfeit if I don't do what they ask. Do you think I enjoy this? Taking from the poor, watching them suffer." His anguish cut through me like a dagger, a painful reminder that sometimes, the battle for the soul is fought on the ground of compassion. Father Samuel's face was a mask of calm, but his eye sparkled with something darker. "Compassion has its price, boy. The church will forgive your sins, but only if you're willing to pay what is due." His words dripped with false benevolence, as if he were bestowing a great favor upon us. The audacity of it made me want to scream, to tear down the walls of this sanctified prison. The clock on the wall ticked with a sinister rhythm, each second a reminder of time slipping away, of choices left unmade. I could almost hear the voices of those who had fallen before us, the whispers of the damned, warning us of the consequences of inaction. "Elias," I urged again, "what if we stood together? What if we—" "Don't you dare speak of standing together," he shot back, eyes blazing, the flicker of rebellion morphing into a roaring fire. "You don't understand the darkness that follows those who defy the church. I can't lose my family. I can't," he broke off, pain twisting his features, the words choking him like a noose. Father Samuel stepped forward, a predator ready to pounce. "Your family will be taken care of if you remain loyal. But betray the church, and you will not only lose your life but theirs as well." "Loyalty," I hissed, venom lacing my words. "Loyalty to a system that bleeds the innocent dry? What kind of faith demands such sacrifice?" The room exploded into chaos, voices clashing like swords, raw emotion crackling in the air. I felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders, pulling me down, suffocating me with the knowledge of what was at stake. This was not merely about coin, it was about souls, about mercy twisted into a weapon, about faith weaponized against the very people who sought solace in its embrace. "Elias!" I shouted, desperation spilling from my lips. "We can break free from this. We don't have to play their game." But the shadows loomed larger, the walls closing in, and I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the way they darted to Father Samuel, seeking approval, seeking absolution. And in that moment, I realized the truth: we were all trapped in a cycle, caught between the sacred and the profane, struggling to find a way out. The night outside felt endless, a vast expanse of darkness echoing our fear, our pain. Time stood still, but the world outside continued to spin, indifferent to our struggle, to our cries for justice. "Do what you must, Elias," Father Samuel said, his tone a chilling whisper, "but remember, the Lord watches. He always watches." And with that, the vulnerability of faith transformed into the cold grip of despair. I felt the walls closing in, the darkness creeping closer like a shroud. The choice lay heavy in the air: action or submission, salvation or damnation. And as I stood there, heart racing, I wondered if we would find the courage to fight back, to face the shadows together, or if we would be consumed by them, lost to the echoes of our choices. I remember the candle flickering one last time before everything plunged into darkness. The shadows danced, and the weight of the world pressed down upon us, leaving us suspended in a moment that felt both infinite and fleeting, the air thick with the promise of confrontation. The battle for our souls had begun, and there would be no turning back. The moon hung low, shrouded in clouds, casting a silver glow over cobblestone streets slick with rain, each drop a whisper of sins long buried. The air crackled with tension, a pulse thrumming beneath the surface. I could feel it in my bones, the ache of dread, mingling with the scent of damp earth and desperation. It was a night like no other, a night to remember, for tonight, the shadows would speak louder than the living. I remember a figure silhouetted against the flickering torchlight, the unmistakable outline of a tax collector. His name was Lucius, an ordinary man draped in the extraordinary burden of greed and disdain, his ledger bulging with the weight of lives crushed under the heel of empire. His hand shook as he clutched the parchment, a list of names that felt more like a death sentence than a record of debts. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, the words tasted bitter, like ashes in his mouth. He was not alone. In the gloom of the alley, beside him stood Clara, a woman whose heart was a precarious balance between love and betrayal. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a storm raging within. She had once been the light in Lucius's darkened soul, a passion ignited amidst the cold calculations of his life. But love had turned to resentment, and now, as the hour approached, the tension hung heavy like the promise of a storm. "I can't do this anymore, Lucius," Clara breathed, her voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed like thunder in his ears. "These people, they're not just numbers. They're lives. Families. They resent you. They hate you." Her words sliced through the air, sharp and relentless, each syllable a dagger aimed at his heart. "I remember a time when we laughed," Lucius shot back, the desperation clawing at his throat. "Before the Empire's grip tightened around our lives, before I became the monster I am. I did this for us." But each time he said us, it felt like a ghost haunting them both. He could almost hear the whispers of the past, laughter intertwined with regret. The children in the streets, their faces smeared with dirt and hope, he had once promised to protect them. Now here he was, a reaper in disguise, scythe poised over those he once called neighbors. Outside, the wind howled, and the shadows danced mockingly, as if the very universe conspired against him. Lucius glanced down at the ledger, the ink still glistening with the weight of the world. Names, addresses, debts, each one a flickering candle in the darkness of his soul. His fingers trembled as he traced the letters, guilt gnawing at him until it felt like a festering wound, raw and bleeding. Across from him, Clara's skin paled under the dim light, her resolve faltering. "They're coming for you, Lucius. The people are gathering. They want blood." The urgency in her voice sent a shiver down his spine, a reminder of the mob that waited just beyond the veil of shadows. The clock ticked mercilessly, each second a reminder of his impending doom. He had taken too much. He had pushed too far. And then there was Marcus, the man who had once called Lucius a friend, a man now standing at the forefront of that angry mob, his face a portrait of betrayal. The shimmering glow of torches illuminated his features, twisted in rage. "You sold us out, Lucius. You sacrificed our homes for your ambition." The accusation hung in the air, heavy with the stench of anger and sorrow. "I remember the games we played as children, the dreams we shared," Lucius whispered, a plea lost in the cacophony of shouts. I never meant for it to come to this. But dreams had turned to nightmares, and the spectre of their shared past seemed to mock him now, a cruel reminder that innocence was lost, buried beneath the weight of greed. As the crowd surged forward, voices rising like a tempest, Lucius felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding, her body trembling. "You can still turn back," she urged, her eyes pleading with him to find redemption, to resist the pull of darkness. But the abyss was calling, and he felt himself teetering on the edge, a solitary soul against the tide of fury. And then, in a flash of blinding clarity, Lucius understood that the ledger was not just a list of names, it was a mirror reflecting every choice he had ever made. Each stroke of the quill, a nail in the coffin of his humanity. He was a tax collector, yes, but he was also a thief of joy, of hope, of life. "I remember the faces," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "I remember the laughter, the kindness. I remember," the words were swallowed by the roar of the mob, but in that moment, suspended in time, he felt the weight of the world crash down upon him. The crowd surged like a tidal wave, voices becoming a deafening roar. Somewhere in the chaos, Clara shrieked his name, a sound of desperation, of love, of everything they could have been. But Lucius was lost, a marionette with severed strings, floating in a sea of rage. The world around him blurred, and for the briefest moment, he was free, a fleeting glimpse of what could have been, slipping through his fingers like sand. And then it happened. A shove. A cry. The torches flickered dangerously, casting shadows that twisted and warped around them. Lucius saw Marcus, face contorted with fury, saw the glint of a knife, a flash of steel aimed straight at his heart. The air crackled with tension, an electric pulse that thrummed through every living thing. Time slowed, stretched into eternity, as the moment hung precariously in balance. Lucius could feel the heartbeat of the universe, could hear the whispers of his choices echoing in the silence. "Run!" Clara screamed, her voice a desperate plea wrapped in a shroud of sorrow. And as the darkness closed in, he could only think of the names, the faces, the lives he had altered forever. But he stood rooted, suspended in the horror of it all, the weight of his decisions crashing over him like a relentless tide, drowning him in regret. The shadows whispered of fates intertwined, successes and failures, despair and redemption. He was a tax collector, yes, but he was also a man standing at the precipice, and in that haunting moment, he had to decide, would he continue down the path of destruction, or would he dare to embrace the light, even if it meant facing the consequences of his sins? In that split second, everything hung in the balance, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to choose. The air hangs heavy, thick and suffocating, as if the very sky mourns the villager's plight. A faint, bitter stench wafts through the streets, a mix of sweat, desperation, and the unyielding scent of decay. I stand at the edge of the village square, where the cobblestones have soaked up the tears of the countless souls crushed beneath the weight of the crown's greed. It's market day, yet the stalls are sparse, like the hopes of the people who linger too long in the shadow of the Lord's manor. I can hear the rasp of old men's voices, whispering curses between cracked lips, their hands trembling as they count the pittance they've managed to scrape together. I remember when the sun shined on our fields, when laughter was a constant melody dancing through the air. But that was before the taxes came like a storm, sweeping through our lives, ripping apart the fragile fabric of our existence. They came to collect with darkened faces and hearts colder than the winter chill. I remember the first time they took more than we thought possible. Mother's eyes, wide with fear, as she clutched the last of our grain to her chest, as if it were the very essence of life itself. She stood there, trembling, while the tax collector, a shadow of a man with a belly that looked as if it had swallowed a whole pig, grinned like a wolf that had just found its prey. And then there's Aveline, my sister, her spirit as fierce as a wild flame. She has the heart of a lion but wears the fragility of a butterfly. I watch her from a distance as she haggles over what remains of our harvest, her voice steady, but I see it, the flicker of despair. She clings to her dreams like a child clings to a doll, yet those dreams are slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. We'll be fine, she insists, but I see her eyes darting toward the manor silhouette, where the Lord feasts on our dreams, belching out laughter that echoes like thunder against our hollowed hearts. Why should they take our last loaf? I hissed to her, my own frustration bubbling like an angry cauldron. Why should they feast while we starve? The words taste bitter on my tongue, a reminder of our hopelessness. I can almost hear the gears of the universe turning, mocking our plight, while I feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon us. Will we ever break free from the chains of this never-ending cycle? In the corner of the square, a child wails, her face smudged with dirt and tears. I want to rush to her, to wrap my arms around her, to shield her from the cruel world that has snatched away her innocence. But I am paralyzed, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I cannot save her. Instead, I watch as her mother kneels, the lines of her face etched deep with the weight of loss, her hand shaking as she offers the last of their meager coins. The tax collector, that bloated spectre of avarice, simply pockets them with a flick of his wrist, his eyes cold and unfeeling. I remember the day when Aveline's laughter turned to silence. It was the day the harvest failed. The fields that once bloomed like a canvas of colors lay barren, an expanse of desolation under the punishing sun. We'll make it through, she had said, her voice a fragile thread of hope. But with every empty basket we carried home, that hope frayed, until one day it snapped. I still see the way her shoulders slumped, how she stared at the ground as if it held all the answers. In that moment, I knew that the weight of taxation had crushed more than our livelihood, it crushed our very souls. And then, as if fate were a cruel jester, came the decree. The Lord's voice boomed like thunder, a proclamation that echoed through the village, all of us cowering under its weight. Another tribute, he declared, as if the very word were a sacred offering. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. We had nothing left to give. Aveline clenched her fists, her rage a palpable force that crackled in the air. We must resist, she whispered to me, her eyes aflame with defiance, a flicker of hope against the encroaching darkness. But how can one fight a storm? The village was a fragile assembly of weary souls, each burdened with their own grief and loss. Yet, there was a spark, a rumor that spread like wildfire, a whisper of rebellion that danced through the cracks of our despair. What if we stood together, they said. What if we said no? The words hung in the air, intoxicating and terrifying. Aveline was the first to speak it aloud, her voice ringing clear like a bell, awakening something within us that we thought had long since died. I remember the night when we gathered beneath the stars, the cosmos stretching endlessly above us, as if the universe itself was listening. The villagers circled around Aveline, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. We will not be silenced, she declared, her voice steady, fierce, a growl rising from the depths of her soul. No more shall we bow to a crown that knows not our suffering. The tension crackled in the air like static, anticipation buzzing in our veins. But as the moon waned, so did our resolve. Fear crept back in, a ghost that fed on our doubts and whispers. The Lord's guards, ruthless and merciless, loomed just outside our reach, their eyes glinting with the promise of violence. And still, we clutched our meager hope, like a newborn's breath held tightly in a parent's embrace, yet knowing it could be snatched away at any moment. I look at Aveline, at the fire that once burned so brightly within her, and I see it flickering, a candle on the verge of extinction. The weight of the world rests heavily on her shoulders, and I can't help but wonder, will our burdens break us? Or will they forge us into something stronger? The clock ticks ominously, each second a reminder of our impending doom. The shadows grow long, stretching out in a dance of despair. Time feels like a cruel joke, a mocking reminder that we are but pawns in a game played by those who know not the taste of struggle. And still, we stand at the precipice, teetering on the edge of rebellion, our hearts echoing with the ancient rhythm of the oppressed. With sweat dripping down our backs and fears gnawing at our resolve, we find ourselves standing on the brink, staring into the abyss of uncertainty. The question lingers, will we have the courage to rise, or will the burden of taxation crush us beneath its relentless weight? The night holds its breath, poised for what comes next, as the world around us waits, heavy with anticipation and dread. The streets were silent, a hush that draped over the remnants of what used to be a bustling market. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and fear, a reminder of the last skirmish just hours ago. I stood there, Amina, just a woman with dreams as fragile as the glass shards littering the ground. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, desperate for freedom. The distant echoes of cannon fire still lingered in my ears, but it was not just the violence that haunted me, it was the dread of what was to come, the chaos that always reclaimed the land. Tax collectors are no longer welcome, they said, their voices rising like the smoke that twisted upwards into the darkening sky. They didn't understand. They never had. They could not grasp that taxation was not solely about numbers and papers, it was the lifeblood of a city, our city. But in this war-torn reality, those numbers had become ghosts, specters of fear that whispered of betrayal and death. I remember the first time I met Elias, a tax collector with a badge of honor and a heart burdened by the weight of his duty. He was standing in front of the crumbling remains of the town hall, his hands trembling slightly, clutching a ledger as if it were a lifeline. "Amina," he said, his voice cracking like dried earth beneath a relentless sun. "I've come to collect." But. That word hung in the air like a curse. In times of war, the act of collecting taxes morphed into a battlefield of its own, fraught with tension and despair. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the flicker of hope dimming with each passing moment. "We're starving," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "How can you collect when we have nothing left to give?" Elias looked away, guilt etched across his brow. "If I don't collect, there will be consequences for all of us. They'll take more than just taxes, they'll demand blood." The words wrapped around my heart, squeezing until I thought it might burst. In that moment, I hated him and loved him in equal measure. I saw the loyalty in his struggle, the fire of conviction that danced in his chest, yet I also saw the monster that dwelled within the system he served. A man caught in the web of bureaucracy, trying to keep his head above the rising tide. "You have to understand," he continued, voice trembling, "the war demands it. The country's survival rests on these numbers." Numbers. Cold, lifeless figures printed on paper. They meant nothing to us, the ones huddled in the shadows, waiting for hope to return like a long-lost friend. But for Elias, they were life and death, a cruel ledger of existence. I could feel the weight of his choices pressing down, like a stone in his pocket as he trudged through the wreckage of dreams. As darkness enveloped the town, a chill crept into my bones. I shivered, not just from the cold but from the shadows that danced at the edges of my vision. "They're coming," I whispered, and he turned to me, eyes wide with terror. "Who?" "The collectors." "The enforcers," I breathed, remembering how they'd stormed through the streets before, demanding compliance with the ruthlessness of a storm. I could see them now, looming figures in the distance, cloaked in the aura of authority, cloaked in violence. "Elias, you must leave," I urged, desperation clawing at my throat. "They won't spare you. They'll take you too." But he shook his head, firm, resolute. "If I leave, what will happen to the others? To you?" Each word was a promise, a testament to the man he wished to be, but in that moment, I could see the cracks widen, his resolve fraying around the edges. And then there was Malik, a boy of barely 18, caught in this tempest of war and taxation. His family had once owned the bakery that filled the air with warmth and life, now reduced to rubble. He had dreams of traveling far beyond this conflict, of tasting the sweetness of freedom. I watched as he picked through the debris, his hand shaking as he gathered the remnants of his past, his heart breaking with each piece he unearthed. "Malik," I called, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Where will you go?" He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the flicker of a dream extinguished. "I don't know. Anywhere but here." Tears pooled, glistening like the last drops of rain in a drought. "But they want my father's dues. They'll come for me next." "Stay strong," I urged, but my words felt weak, hollow. What good were promises in a world where the sky itself seemed to conspire against us? We all lived in fear of the tax collectors, the specters of authority that emerged like phantoms in the twilight. They were said to have no heart, no compassion, and in war, their presence was a shadow, looming, relentless, demanding. They didn't just collect taxes, they collected lives, squeezing every last drop from the weary souls left behind. I remember the night they came for Elias. A sharp knock shattered the stillness, a sound so final it ripped the breath from my lungs. I knew what it meant. I felt Malik's hand grip mine, the quiet resolve of a boy faced with a man's world. Together, we held our ground, hearts racing, knowing that the fight was not just for our lives but for the very essence of our humanity. "Stay back!" I shouted as the door burst open, darkness flooding in. The figures were cloaked, their faces hidden behind masks of authority, and I felt the chill of their presence settle deep in my bones. "Tax collector," one of them hissed, the word dripping with disdain, a curse more potent than any bullet. Elias stood before them, defiance shining in his eyes. "I won't let you take me." "Then you will pay the price," they snarled, a serpent coiling to strike. In that moment, everything collapsed, the walls of my world crumbled, and I felt the weight of despair wrap around me like a noose. I screamed, but it was swallowed by the void, uncertainty thrumming like a heartbeat in the darkness. Elias, Malik, myself, we were all just pawns in this cruel game of survival, the impact of war clawing at our sanity, our very souls. Each moment stretched into eternity, the air thick with the unspoken, a fear so palpable it resonated through our veins. The shadows danced with the flicker of a dying flame, and we understood then that war was not just a conflict, it was an insatiable beast that devoured everything in its path, leaving behind nothing but ash and echoes. And as I stood there, heart racing, breath hitching in my throat, I knew. We were not just fighting for survival. We were fighting for the very foundation of who we were, for the city that had cradled our dreams and the love that still flickered like a candle in the storm. "Stop!" I cried, but the words were lost in the chaos, a universe collapsing into itself, darkness swallowing all hope. The shadows loomed larger, insatiable, and the impact of war stretched into the abyss, a relentless tide that would never recede. The clock strikes midnight, its echo shattering the stillness of the night like the brittle glass of a broken promise. In a cramped backroom of a weathered building, shadows dance around flickering fluorescent lights, illuminating the faces that have seen too much, felt too little. Here, morality dangles precariously on the edge of a knife, bloodied and frayed. I can feel the tension coiling tight in my chest, a serpent ready to strike. The air is thick with the stench of desperation, a stench that clings to the skin like sweat. Maria stands by the window, her fingers tracing the condensation on the glass, each droplet a tear that's fallen uncried. The city outside is a slumbering beast, unaware of the rot festering within its heart. Maria's eyes are hauntingly dark, mirroring the void created by years of being a cog in a corrupt machine. She remembers the dreams she once had, the ones filled with justice and righteousness. But those dreams have been suffocated under the weight of whispers and shadows. She turns, her voice a barely audible whisper as she speaks to David, her partner in this dance of deceit. "I remember when I thought this job meant something," she says, her tone laced with bitterness, each word like jagged glass. "When I believed I could change the world, one case at a time." David, his face a mask of fatigue, exhales sharply, the sound reverberating like a gunshot in the silence. His brow is furrowed, etched with lines that tell stories of sleepless nights and moral dilemmas. He's seen too much too quickly, bribes exchanged in shadowy alleyways, the glint of money twisting into the souls of the desperate. "And now," he replies, his voice a low rumble filled with a pain that feels all too familiar. "Now we're just part of the problem." Outside, the city hums, a symphony of sirens and distant shouts. It's alive, but not in a good way. The pulse of corruption beats loudly, drowning out the cries for justice. In the dark corners where deals are made, morality is a distant echo, a ghost that haunts those unable to forget their initial intentions. Maria remembers. She can still feel the thrill of the first case she solved, the thrill of seeing someone vindicated. But as the years dragged on, that thrill gave way to the sickening realization that justice often came at a price. "I can't do this anymore," she breathes, "I can't wake up every day knowing I'm part of this." But David, with his haunted eyes, those deep pools of despair that reflect a world gone wrong, grips her hand tightly. "What's the alternative, Maria? You think walking away is the answer? They'll come after us. You know that." His voice trembles, resonating with the urgency of a man standing on the precipice of a decision that could shatter everything. In that moment, the room feels like a cage, the walls closing in as the weight of their choices hangs heavy in the air. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows, and the clock ticks down, each second echoing like a countdown to oblivion. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and a figure steps into the room, Javier, the very embodiment of corruption. He's the ghost that haunts their nights, the whisperer of deceit. He exudes power, a darkness that draws in the weak and the weary. You too, he sneers, still playing the good cop. You should know by now, it's a dirty game. Maria's heart races, a drumbeat of fear and anger. Javier's presence wraps around her like a noose, tightening with every word. You know the stakes, don't you? His smile is a predator's grin, sharp and dangerous. You think you can walk away? There are no exits in this game. I feel the air grow colder, the tension snapping like a taut string. Maria's resolve falters under Javier's gaze, the shadows behind him swirling like demons ready to drag her into oblivion. We could expose you, she retorts, her voice trembling, but the fire behind her words flickers uncertainly. Expose me? You really think anyone would care? Javier's laughter echoes through the room, a chilling sound that rattles the very bones of their convictions. You're nothing but pawns. Just like me. Just like this city. David's grip tightens around Maria's hand, a silent plea for strength, for clarity in this swirling chaos. We're not pawns, he growls, his voice low and dangerous. We're people. We have power too. But Javier moves closer, invading their space, a malevolent shadow. Power? You think you have power? He leans in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The only power you have is the illusion of choice. You make me rich or you disappear. It's as simple as that. I feel Maria's heart plummet, a lead weight in her chest. The walls close in, and despair washes over her like a cold wave. She remembers her dreams, the memories of a better world, now tainted by the reality of human greed. The shadows twist and turn, revealing the truth that lies beneath the surface, a truth as evil and twisted as the world they inhabit. And in that harrowing moment, something inside her ignites. The fear, the heartbreak, the sense of hopelessness, it begins to morph into something else, a flicker of defiance. No, she whispers, the word barely escaping her lips. But it's a start, a fragile seed of rebellion planted in the soil of corruption. The clock ticks on, relentless and unforgiving, as the shadows of their choices loom ever larger. The confrontation hangs heavy in the air, a taut thread ready to snap, spiraling into chaos. The weight of their souls, torn between right and wrong, light and dark, hangs delicately as they delve deeper into a world where nothing is as it seems. And just as the storm prepares to break, the darkness whispers a chilling truth: this is only the beginning. The choice they'll make will shape not just their fates, but the very fabric of the city around them, a city teetering on the brink of destruction, where every heartbeat marks the passage of time in a world consumed by its own shadows. The sun hung like a dying ember in the sky, casting a sickly orange hue over the village as the air thickened with despair. Children's laughter, once a vibrant symphony, had been silenced, replaced by the hollow echoes of empty stomachs. In the center square, a tax collector stood, the weight of the world etched into his face, a face lined with worry and the creeping dread of what lay ahead. The villagers whispered, eyes darting like frightened birds, and in that tense silence, the tax collector, Anton, felt it, the pulse of fear. I remember the moment when the sickly sweet scent of decay seeped into my lungs, mingling with the acrid stench of desperation. They were hungry. Oh, how they were hungry. Each sun that rose only deepened their shadows, but here stood Anton, a man caught in the crosshairs of duty and humanity. His hands trembled as he clutched the parchment of decrees, the ink still wet with the blood of their livelihoods. And there was Ilara, her spirit as fierce as wildfire, a mother who had once cradled dreams of abundance. Now, her children lay curled up under tattered blankets, their bellies swollen, faces sunken. The day she watched her youngest, a firecracker of a girl with dreams too big for her tiny body, collapse into a heap of skin and bones. Oh, I remember that day. Ilara had screamed, a sound that split the air like a thunderclap. She lunged toward Anton, her hands clawing at the air, desperate for answers as if he were the very embodiment of her agony. You take what little we have left, she spat, her voice a dagger. You're a monster in a suit. You come here with your papers and your demands, while my children, die. Anton's heart raced. He had seen too much, the lines of misery etched on faces he once called friends, the cries of starving children echoed in his nightmares. But he was bound, shackled to the law, a cog in a machine that didn't care if it crushed the very souls of those it fed off. Then there was Magnus, the old man with eyes like storm clouds, a man who had lived too long and tasted too much bitterness. He watched from a distance, the remnants of his wisdom buried beneath layers of regret. "We've lost more than we can bear," he murmured to no one and everyone at once. "Famine steals more than food, it robs us of our very selves." His words hung heavy, a shroud over the scene, whispering of a truth that felt like a gunshot. Anton felt the weight of their stares, the accusation simmering beneath their skin. Each pair of eyes was a mirror reflecting his own internal war, a battle between compassion and duty. The parchment, crumpled in his grip, felt like a noose tightening around his throat. He took a step forward, heart pounding like a war drum, but Ilara's eyes pierced through him, a fiery beacon of pain that threatened to engulf him whole. "Do you not hear us?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Do you not feel what we feel?" A silence fell, thick, suffocating. He could hear the whispers of the past, the echoes of laughter and warmth that once filled this square, now replaced by the suffocating weight of despair. He stepped back, stumbling into the shadows cast by the setting sun. The clock tower loomed, its hands frozen in time, an eternal reminder of how quickly days turned into weeks of suffering. But still, he had to speak. "I'm bound by the law," the words felt hollow, a fragile shield against the storm brewing around him. They didn't care about the laws that dictated their lives, they cared about survival. They wanted to know, was he a man or a monster? In that moment, Anton was torn between two worlds, one that demanded obedience and order, and another that begged for mercy in the face of overwhelming adversity. He could almost taste the bitter ash of regret on his tongue. He thought of his own children, of warm meals and laughter echoing through their home. The thought cut deep, a reminder of the choice he had made, a choice that put him on this path, a path stained with the blood of innocence. Ilara's fingers clenched into fists, shaking with rage and desperation. "You don't understand, do you?" Her voice trembled, raw with sorrow. "Every coin you extract is a piece of our lives taken away. You may return to your warm home, but we're left here to rot." His heart ached for her. He saw the faces of his own children, bright and innocent, and he couldn't bear the thought of their laughter being silenced by the very system that demanded his loyalty. A flicker of rebellion ignited within him, a frantic hope that threatened to consume him. But could he rise against the very fabric of his existence? The shadows danced around them as twilight cloaked the village, whispers of rebellion flitting through the darkness. Each tick of the clock was a countdown to something unknown, an explosion of truths long buried, or the end of all hope. And in that moment of chaos and tension, the lines blurred. Magnus stepped forward, his voice a thunderstorm. "What will it take for you to see? We are not just numbers on a ledger, we are flesh and blood, dreams and sorrows. You wield your power like a sword, but it cuts us deeper than you know." Anton looked between them, a bridge between worlds, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. The weight of 1,000 decisions pressed down on him, suffocating. Here stood Ilara, the embodiment of a mother's plea, and Magnus, the wisdom of the ages etched in his weathered skin. In that charged silence, he felt it, the shattering of illusions, the breaking of chains long thought unbreakable. But still, the clock ticked, the world continued to spin, and he stood at the precipice, teetering on the edge of a decision that could change everything. And then, like a breath held too long, it snapped. In that very moment, Anton knew he was more than just a collector of taxes, he was a human being standing at the crossroads of humanity. The shadows whispered promises, the ghosts of the past clawing at his conscience, urging him to take a step into the dark. Would he remain a puppet of the system, or would he seize the moment, risking everything to rewrite the narrative? As the first stars blinked awake in the bruised sky, illuminating the unfolding chaos below, the air thick with possibility and tension, Anton's pulse quickened. The world was waiting. An answer hung on the tip of his tongue. Would it be enough? Would it change anything? But the silence remained, aching, pregnant with uncertainty, as hunger echoed through the shadows, a symphony of despair, a call to arms. In that moment, time stood still, and the weight of history pressed down like a shroud. The final breath before the plunge, before the collision of fate, before the storm unleashed an awakening that could either save them or drown them in darkness. And in that charged moment where everything hung in the balance, the echoes of a broken world stirred restlessly, waiting for the inevitable to unfold. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting stark shadows across the office. Each pulse whispered urgency, a strobe of fear that danced along the walls. It was a night like no other, a night when the air crackled with tension, when the weight of every unspoken word felt like a brick on the chest. I remember the moment vividly, the cold chill that snaked down my spine as I stared at the glowing screen, the numbers swirling like ghosts haunting my thoughts. Each figure was a life, real, breathing, alive, yet reduced to mere data, a mere entry in a ledger that felt like a death sentence. Maya sat across from me, her fingers trembling over the keyboard, a stark contrast to the fierce determination burning in her hazel eyes. A single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, and I wanted to reach out, to wipe it away, to shield her from the storm brewing inside this sterile space. "We have to finish this. We owe it to them," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and every second that ticked by felt like a countdown to something inevitable. And then there was Marcus, lurking in the shadows like a spectre, the ever-watchful guardian of secrets. He was a man you couldn't quite trust, a flawed hero wrapped in the guise of a mentor. His past loomed over him like a dark cloud, a history tangled in the very data we were dissecting. "Are you sure you want to see this?" he asked, his gaze piercing through the veil of my resolve. "Once you know, you can't unsee it." I felt the weight of choice pressing down on me, the gravity of knowledge threatening to crush my spirit. I remember the way the clock ticked loudly, a heartbeat echoing in this sterile room. Time felt twisted, warped by the urgency and fear, as we pulled data from every dark corner of the network, each byte a fragment of a life, each file a haunting memory. It was like peeling back layers of skin, exposing raw flesh. I could almost hear their whispers, the voices of those who had slipped through the cracks, their lives reduced to numbers and charts. "I can't do this alone," Maya said, desperation creeping into her voice. "We need to know who's behind this, who's pulling the strings." I felt the tremor in her words, the weight of her fears. She was haunted, driven by the ghosts of families torn apart by unjust audits, by lives irrevocably altered by decisions made in cold, sterile offices far removed from the heart of the chaos. Marcus leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the data. "They're all connected," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent chills cascading down my spine. "A network of information, weaving a web that ensnares the innocent." I could see it in his eyes, the flicker of a memory, the faces of those who had suffered, the families he had fought for, the burdens he carried like a coffin on his back. The shadows lengthened around us as the clock continued its relentless march. I felt the tension pulse within the room, a living entity that twisted and turned, squeezing the air from my lungs. "What are we willing to sacrifice?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but it hung in the air like a heavy cloud, pregnant with unspoken fears and unyielding determination. "Are we ready to confront the truth, to become part of this nightmare?" Maya looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We have to. If we don't, they'll keep doing this, destroying lives, erasing dreams." The passion in her voice ignited a fire within me, and I could feel the heat radiating off her, pushing against the suffocating silence. I thought of the families, the mothers and fathers, the children with eyes wide open and dreams still alive. They were counting on us. As we delved deeper into the abyss of data, the shadows began to shift, morphing into shapes that seemed to dance just out of reach of understanding. Each click of the mouse felt like a heartbeat, urgent, pounding, relentless. "I remember the faces," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could catch them. The times I had to look them in the eye, to tell them their lives were just numbers, just files in a cabinet. Marcus chuckled, but it was hollow, echoing off the walls like a laugh from the grave. "You think this is just about numbers?" His voice dripped with bitterness, a bitter reminder of the reality we faced. "It's about power, about control. They'll crush anyone who dares to stand in their way. He leaned back, eyes glazed as if seeing ghosts rather than the reality around us. Are you prepared for what comes next? I drew a shaky breath, the weight of the moment bearing down on me, the realization that we were standing at the precipice of something vast and terrifying. The knowledge we were about to uncover could shatter lives, could lay bare the raw, unvarnished truth that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. I remember the fear in their eyes, I said, my voice breaking with the weight of memories that clawed at my heart. I can't bear to see it again. With a sudden burst of energy, Maya slammed her hands on the desk, her voice rising above the suffocating silence. We can change this. We can expose the truth. We can fight for them. Her words cut through the darkness, igniting a spark of hope in the abyss. I looked into her eyes, and for a moment, I saw the fire that had brought us together, the belief that drove us forward. But as we delved deeper, the shadows grew darker, curling around us like serpents, whispering secrets in a language I didn't understand. I could feel the weight of the world pressing upon my shoulders, the burden of responsibility clawing its way into my soul. What if we don't make it out? What if we become the next victims? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the fear lacing my words like venom. Marcus's gaze was steady, his resolve unyielding. Then at least we die fighting. And maybe, just maybe, we'll shed light on the darkness. The conviction in his words washed over me, a balm for the wounds that had opened in the depths of my heart. And as we plunged deeper into the digital abyss, the whispers grew louder, the shadows thicker. The ghosts of the past swirled around us, spiraling into a cacophony of rage, despair, and defiance. We were on the edge, teetering between despair and hope, between the darkness and the light, and I felt the very fabric of our lives unraveling with every keystroke. The night stretched on, a dark canvas painted with the fear of what we might uncover, and I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. I remember the moment we stumbled upon the truth, the moment our resolve would be tested, the moment when the line between right and wrong blurred into a terrifying haze. The air crackled with anticipation, a storm waiting to unleash its fury, and in the silence, we stood, trembling at the edge of the abyss, ready to confront the darkness that awaited us. A clock ticks, its hands clawing toward midnight. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and fear. I stand in the shadows of a crumbling manor, the once magnificent estate of the noble house of Alaric, now a husk echoing with the groans of lost grandeur. It could be a graveyard or a banquet hall, the line blurs where despair festers, where laughter once rolled like thunder across its marble floors. And I remember the stories, the ones that elders whispered to us by the flickering light of the hearth. Elena, the peasant girl, her hands calloused from the unforgiving soil, runs breathless through the fields now barren for want of rain. She clutches a frayed shawl around her shoulders, the only warmth in an unkind world. Her heart races against the backdrop of clashing metal and shouting voices. Taxation looms like a storm cloud, a spectre haunting the land. Each coin extracted from the earth is another weight on her soul, another burden pressing down until it feels like she can't breathe. I feel her desperation, her blood pounding in time with the clock's relentless tick. Across the expanse of the estate, Lord Cedric Alaric sits upon his gilded throne, unaware of the storm gathering beyond his walls. His fingers, adorned with rings of emerald and ruby, tap nervously against the armrest, the sound echoing like a drumbeat heralding doom. He gazes into a glass of wine, swirling the rich liquid as if it might reveal answers to the growing discontent in his heart. I remember the way he used to laugh, a sound crisp and booming, but now it's laced with the bitter aftertaste of dread. The nobles feast while the peasants starve, and that chasm widens under the weight of heavy taxes. Cedric's pulse quickens as he hears whispers of rebellion, an insurrection brewing like a fever in the fevered minds of the hungry. Elena's family has already felt the sting of the tax collector's whip. "We'll pay what we can," she remembers her father saying, voice trembling, "I sunken from hunger." The moonlight bathes her in silver, illuminating her fierce resolve as she gathers her courage to confront the unyielding walls of the manor. It's a mad gamble, her body, frail but determined, moving toward the heart of the beast. The gates, tall and wrought with iron, loom like the jaws of some insatiable creature, ready to swallow her whole. What chance do I have, she thinks, but the thought is swallowed by a rising tide of defiance. Cedric feels the ground shaking beneath him, every uproar a reminder of his frail hold on power. Is this how empires fall, he wonders, gripping the armrest tighter, the wood biting into his skin. He knows the weight of gold, the power it holds over life and death, yet it feels more like a shackle than a crown. The laughter of his guests, once a choir of indulgence, now grates against his ears. They toast to victories that feel hollow, to conquests that will fuel their insatiable greed. But Cedric hears the whispers, the voices of the people twisted with anger, desperation, and a hunger that can no longer be ignored. The night air is electric, a tension crackling like lightning about to strike. Elena stands at the gates, heart racing, breathing heavily as if the very act of standing there is defiance incarnate. I will not be a ghost, she whispers to the night, resolve solidifying like iron in her veins. She remembers her mother's words, "You are the blood of the earth, child. You have the strength of your ancestors." Each step forward is a prayer, each heartbeat an affirmation of her existence in a world that would rather she disappear. And then, a crescendo. A shout pierces the night, a battle cry rippling through the air, echoing off the stones of the manor. Cedric's head snaps up, fear gripping him like a vice. The peasants are at the gates, faces twisted in rage, eyes ablaze with the fire of 1,000 grievances. "We are not your shadows," they scream. Their voices rise like a tide, crashing against the walls of the manor, demanding to be seen, to be heard. The weight of their desperation hangs heavy in the air, a palpable force. I feel the weight of it all, the tension wrapped around my chest like a noose. Will this be the night? I wonder, breathless, caught in the maelstrom of emotion swirling around me. The clock ticks louder, a heartbeat thundering in my ears, urging the inevitable confrontation. Cedric, trapped in his gilded cage, understands now that wealth is no shield against the tides of anger. The people, the very soil he claims to own, rise against him, demanding justice for the injustices they've suffered. What have I done, he thinks, but the question is swallowed by the roar outside. Elena pushes through the crowd, her voice rising above the chaos. "This is our land. We will not cower any longer." Each word is a blade, carving away at the fear that binds her. She is not just a peasant, she is a force of nature, a tempest unleashed. The air thickens with anticipation, the moment suspended, teetering on the edge of chaos. Cedric's heart pounds in his chest like a war drum. He steps to the window, the cold glass a barrier between him and the cries of the oppressed, and for the first time, he feels the weight of the crown crushing him. But there is no escape. No shield. No armor strong enough to protect him from the reckoning that comes with the light of dawn. The shadows of the night stretch, and I know this will not end here. The story is far from over. It is a tangled web, a cycle of power and desperation, of wealth and poverty. And as I watch, breath held, heart racing, I understand that the struggle between the nobility and the peasantry is a timeless dance, one that will continue until the very fabric of society unravels, leaving nothing but echoes of humanity's restless heart pounding against the walls of injustice. The echo of a distant bell pierced through the fog, a mournful chime that hung heavy in the air, like a ghost haunting a forgotten grave. It rattled in my chest as I stood there, a mere shadow among the cobblestones, watching. The town square was alive, yet it felt like a funeral procession. The vibrant stalls of fresh bread and colorful fabrics felt like a cruel joke, laughter mingling with the clamor of an approaching storm. On the periphery, the tax collector, a gaunt figure draped in somber gray, moved with the weight of despair tugging at his shoulders, like a marionette with fraying strings. I remember the first time I saw him, Julian, a man more spectre than flesh, I sunken from sleepless nights and burdens unshared. His fingers traced the parchment of unpaid dues with an almost reverent touch, as if each scratch of ink were a sin carved into stone. He had once walked with pride, head held high, a pillar of the community. Now, he slumped, an edifice crumbling under the weight of his own name. In every corner of town, the whispers slithered through the shadows, tax collector, they sneered, the harbinger of ruin. But it wasn't just Julian who bore the scars. Across the square, a woman named Ayla stood, her hands clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms like tiny daggers. She was a baker, the one who transformed mere flour and water into warm loaves, each crust a testament to hope. But hope was a fickle mistress, and today, her oven lay cold. "How can he demand what we don't have?" she spat, her voice a dagger aimed at the heart of the crowd. "How can he take from the hungry to feed his greed?" I remember the night before, the whispered voices that drifted through the tavern like smoke. "He's just doing his job," some said, "but the job has become monstrous." The laughter was hollow, the mugs raised in toast to the very man who would bleed them dry. I could see Julian's face, the twitch of his mouth as he feigned indifference, but within him swirled a tempest. Each coin he collected was a dagger thrust into his own gut, twisting. A tax collector haunted not by ghosts of the past but by the very people he once called neighbors. The clock tower struck, and the crisp air sharpened. Ayla stared down the tax collector as if willing him to dissolve into the mist. "You think you're a ghost too, don't you?" Her words dripped with venom, slicing through the rabble. "You haunt us with shadows of our own desperation." Julian's eyes flared, a spark flickering in the depths of his soul, a challenge igniting in that moment. "I am not your enemy," he retorted, voice trembling, a desperate plea for understanding. But the truth hung between them, taut as a bowstring. He had become their executioner. The very act of collecting taxes had turned him into a spectre of death, and in that moment, he understood the burden of his role. The sky darkened, clouds swirling like the chaos in our hearts, and I felt the tension crackle in the air. A storm brewed, one that would sweep away the false comforts of their lives. I remember the days when we shared bread, not burdens, Alice shouted, her voice cracking, echoing off the stone walls, a lamentation for the community that was slowly disintegrating. Julian clenched his jaw, swallowing the bitterness rising in his throat. "You think I want this? Do you think I relish in your suffering?" The words clawed their way out, jagged and raw, as if each syllable tore through him. "Every coin I take is another piece of myself lost." The townsfolk, gnarled faces set like stone, turned their gaze upon him, eyes glinting with betrayal. What was once a sacred trust had become a currency of anguish. And standing at the center of it all, I felt as though I was watching a great tragedy unfold, a play where the actors had lost their lines. I remember the first time I felt the weight of taxes. It was a mere whisper, a pinch of fear that gnawed at the edges of my dreams. They bathed once a year, so romance was earthy, I'd joked, but now, even humor felt like a betrayal. We all lived under the shadow of an impending reckoning, a reckoning that had begun to ripple through the town like a fever. With a deep breath, Ayla stepped closer, the fire within her igniting the air. "Then release us. Stop this madness. Let us rise together, as once we did, before you became a puppet of greed." The crowd swelled, a living, breathing entity of anger and desperation. Julian's heart thumped against his ribs, a war drum in his chest. He saw their faces shift, flickering between anger and understanding. No longer were they just townsfolk, they were the echoes of his childhood, the laughter of friends long gone, the specter of a community that once thrived. "Justice is not a ledger." Alice's eyes glimmered with unshed tears, each drop a testament to dreams lost, hopes dashed. "We should not drown in your ledger, Julian." In that moment, the world around him faded. The cobblestones, the market stalls, even the cold wind, all of it disappeared, leaving only the raw pulse of their shared humanity. In his silence, Julian found the echoes of his own despair, a mirror held up to his soul. What had he become? A collector of pain, a thief of dreams. He felt the weight of that realization, heavy like iron shackles, binding him to a fate he feared more than death itself. But as the storm gathered, it was not just the anger of the people he felt, it was their heartbeats, their collective fear, their humanity. The clash of their lives was a symphony of despair, resonating through the air, begging for release. And as the skies darkened and the thunder rolled, I realized that their fates were intertwined, stitched together by pain and hope, like a tapestry woven with light and shadow. Each moment spiraled toward a climax, a reckoning neither Julian nor Alice could escape. The specter of the tax collector loomed large against the backdrop of a trembling town, and I could almost hear the heartbeats quickening, each pulse a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. And as I stood there, powerless, I felt the weight of history pressing down on us all, a reminder that sometimes, to break away from the chains of the past, one must first confront the ghosts that haunt them. The storm was coming, and with it, the promise of change, or perhaps, the end of everything we knew. The night was suffocating, the air thick with tension. Shadows clung to the damp cobblestones like whispers of forgotten souls, carrying the weight of centuries. I stood there, heart racing, as the town square echoed with the clatter of hooves and the distant murmur of anxious voices. Who were these figures in cloaks, their faces obscured, gliding through the mist like harbingers of dread? The moon hung like a wicked eye, casting its silver light on the grim tableau below. I could almost feel the pulse of history, the thrum of lives lived in fear and desperation, all for the sake of a few coins. "Damn the tax collector!" A voice pierced the night. It belonged to Eleanor, a woman whose spirit burned brightly, even as her hands trembled against the rough wood of the barricade. She was a daughter of this village, yet her heart felt like a stone, heavy with the burden of the past. Eleanor had watched her family's fortunes dwindle, each coin snatched away by a faceless bureaucrat. "They've come for our last scraps, our dignity." Her words dripped with defiance, but I saw the fear flicker in her eyes, a flame threatening to be snuffed out. And then there was Thomas, the town's once proud blacksmith, now a shell of his former self. He stood beside Eleanor, his shoulders hunched, as if the weight of the world pressed down upon him. Each hammer stroke used to resonate with purpose, echoing strength and pride. Now, they felt like the pitiful clang of surrender. "What choice do we have?" he muttered, voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air like a noose. "They've taken everything. How can we fight?" I remember the way the moonlight caught the glint of his tear-streaked face, the agony of a man watching his dreams dissolve into the mist. "They will come for you, too," he said, his voice quaking. "They will always come." I wanted to reach for him, to pull him back from the edge where despair loomed like a hungry beast. But the words caught in my throat, trapped by the weight of history. The medieval tax collectors were specters that haunted not just the village, but the very fabric of society. Their presence loomed large, a ghostly reminder of a time when kings demanded fealty through fear. These men, with their quills and parchment, wielded power that transcended blood and birthright. The tolls they collected were not just coins, they were the essence of lives lived in submission. I shuddered as memories whispered through time of peasants forced to labor under the unyielding yoke of taxation, of families torn apart by the insatiable hunger of a system designed to oppress. I remember the later night spent poring over dusty tomes, lost in fascination over the absurdity of it all. They bathed once a year. I would chuckle, so, yeah, romance was earthy. But the humor felt hollow now, a mask for the melancholy that seeped into my bones like an unshakable chill. The more I laughed, the more the shadows wove their way into my heart, and I began to understand, there was no joy in their plight, only an echo of pain reverberating through the ages. As the figures closed in, I could see the tax collectors, their sneers barely concealed beneath the hoods that shrouded them in mystery. They were the ghosts of the past, suffocating the present with their avarice. "Your debts are due," one snarled, and the words cut through the night like a blade. It pierced through Eleanor's resolve, her defiance wavering like a candle flickering against the storm. "We have nothing left," she cried, desperation clawing at her throat. "Take our lives if you must, but leave our children be." But the collectors laughed, a chilling sound that felt like a curse. They relished in the power, the domination of the helpless. For them, this was sport, a game of misery played at the expense of human lives. The air crackled with tension, and I could almost taste the bitterness of defeat on my tongue. "No!" It burst from my lips, an instinctive cry draped in horror, as I stepped forward, driven by a force I couldn't quite understand. The faces turned toward me, incredulous. "You cannot take what's not yours." My heart pounded, but the fear in my chest was drowned out by the flickering flame of rebellion igniting within me. Thomas's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope sneaking through the shadows. Eleanor looked at me as if I were a lifeline tossed into turbulent seas, and suddenly I wasn't just a bystander, I was a player in this drama, a voice against the tide of oppression. But history is a relentless spectre, a reminder of the futile battles fought and lost. As I stood there, a fragile barrier against the tide of inevitability, I remembered the echoes of the past, the cries of the oppressed, the sacrifices made, and the lives extinguished by the relentless machinery of tax collection. With every heartbeat, the weight of those voices pressed upon me, and I felt the responsibility for their stories, a collective history that demanded to be acknowledged, to be felt. The confrontation loomed, a moment suspended in time, and I realized I was standing on the precipice of something greater than myself. "If we are to fall, let it be together!" I shouted, and the words hung in the air, vibrating with an intensity that felt almost cosmic. In that heartbeat, the past and present collided, and the pain of history surged through me like an electric current. The tax collectors, once mere shadows, now stood as grotesque reminders of the battles still to be fought. And then silence. That eerie stillness, pregnant with tension, as the world held its breath. The collectors shifted, their eyes glinting with the promise of retribution, and I could feel the ghosts of the medieval past whispering around us, urging us to rise or fall. In that fragile moment, we were not just a village, we were a reckoning, a culmination of dreams, despair, and an unyielding desire for freedom. The scene unfolded before me, each heartbeat echoing into the abyss, a tapestry woven of fear and hope. The struggle was not just for coins but for the very soul of humanity, a battle that transcended time and space, haunting the present with the spectre of the past. As the first shouts broke the silence, I braced for impact, knowing that history was not a chain to be broken but a thread that wove through our lives, binding us together in the fight for what was right. And there, encircled by shadows, the legacy of those medieval tax collectors loomed large, reminding us that the struggles of yesterday were still alive in the hearts of today. The night stretched endlessly before us, a canvas painted with our fears and dreams, and I could feel the pulsing rhythm of something primal, something fierce, as the battle of wills began to unfold. The air was heavy that night, thick with the scent of damp earth and fear. Rain fell in torrents, striking the cobbled streets like 1,000 tiny daggers, piercing through the silence that wrapped around the village of Eldenridge like a shroud. I stood there, heart pounding, watching as the flickering torchlight danced in puddles, shadows trembling as if they were alive, whispering secrets to one another. The tax collector, a spectre in his own right, loomed in the doorway, his presence a dark omen to the townsfolk gathered outside. I remember the faces, hollow eyes, lips pressed tight, like strings pulled too taut. They wore their desperation like a second skin. Among them stood Alice, her fists clenched, knuckles pale as bone, and across from her, the figure of her father, a once proud farmer reduced to a ghost of his former self. He had once coaxed life from the soil, but now he feared the very ground beneath his feet. Alice loved him fiercely, her resolve was like steel, yet each heartbeat betrayed her vulnerability. Their lives lay tangled, woven together by the threads of loss and a looming reckoning. The tax collector was an embodiment of authority and dread, clad in garments as dark as the midnight sky. He held a ledger, a tome of misery, the weight of which hung heavier than the rain-soaked air. He scanned the crowd, eyes cold, calculating. I could feel the tension electrifying the night, a palpable charge that made the hair on my neck stand on end. It was a game of power, and we were all pawns on a board that felt like it had no edges. I remember the whispers, the murmur of discontent. "He's come for the sheep," a voice trembled, "and leave us with nothing but the bones." Alice's father's face paled further, the very thought sending shadows across his brow. He had fed his family with that sheep, nurtured it as one might a child, but now it was a bargaining chip in a cruel transaction. The rain continued to fall, but it felt like the heavens were weeping for us all. Alice took a step forward, defiance flaring in her eyes. "You cannot take what is not yours," she spat, voice rising above the rain, fierce as the lightning that split the sky. The tax collector's lips curled into a sneer, the kind that makes you want to claw at your own skin. He was the embodiment of oppression, wielding his power with a heavy hand. "You misunderstand, girl. This is not about what I want. This is the king's decree." I felt the words hit like arrows, piercing through the veil of hope that hung delicately around us. The king, distant and uncaring, ruled with a fist clothed in velvet, his decrees a silent death sentence to the laborers who tilled the land. Alice looked back at her father, anguish threading through her resolve. "I will not let them take you, father. I will fight." But the fight was not hers alone to bear. It was a battle that had raged for centuries, spilling blood and dreams into the soil, as steady as the river that carved its way through the valley. I, too, felt the weight of history pressing down, a tide of suffering that echoed through the ages. The faces of those who had come before us, their cries for justice lost in the annals of time, haunted me. Alis took another step forward, and I marveled at her bravery. But bravery can be a double-edged sword, and I feared the sharpness of her conviction would cut through the fragile threads holding us together. Enough, the tax collector barked, voice reverberating through the deluge, you will pay, one way or another. The promise hung in the air, thick and suffocating like the storm clouds above. I remember the moment when the silence broke, pierced by the sound of her father's desperate plea. Alis, please. He was a man worn by toil, and yet here he stood, stripped bare, his spirit raw, his heart a frail little bird flapping against a storm. The villagers shifted, a collective breath held, waiting for the current of this confrontation to turn. But then came the laughter, a twisted, cruel sound that danced around us like a ghost. It came from the shadows, from the heart of the darkened alleyways. I turned, and there was Gareth, the butcher's son, his eyes wild with the thrill of chaos. What will you give if you cannot pay? He cackled, a demon in the guise of a boy. Your blood. Your bones. The rain poured harder, and for a moment, it felt as if the world itself was coming undone. There was an undercurrent of madness in the night. Alis' fury ignited, but fear flickered in her gaze. She stood between her father and the abyss was hungry. Leave us be, she cried, voice a thunderclap against the oncoming storm. But her words dissolved into the air, fading like the last embers of a dying fire. I felt the despair wrap around me, a shroud of inevitability. The faces of the crowd blurred together, a mosaic of fear, hope, and the indomitable spirit of humanity struggling against a tide that threatened to swallow us whole. Time stretched, twisted, and turned. I watched as the villagers, once comrades in arms, grew divided, some casting furtive glances at the tax collector, others at Alis, their resolve crumbling under the weight of their own burdens. Fight or submit, the rain whispered. What choice remains? A moment passed, and then another, each heartbeat echoing like a drum, the rhythm of impending conflict building to a crescendo. I could feel the pull of history, the weight of centuries pressing down, as if the very earth beneath us begged for liberation. And yet, standing there, I realized, there was no simple resolution, only the bitter taste of survival. As the storm raged on, I felt that familiar feeling, the ache of something lost, the longing for justice that often eludes us. The lesson was there, hanging like a ghost in the stormy night, a truth wrapped in the complexities of power and sacrifice, of love and loss. We were all a part of this tumultuous dance, struggling to find footing in a world that seemed to revel in chaos. The rain fell harder, and I sensed that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental, as if the very cosmos was holding its breath, waiting for the clash that would echo throughout time. The threads of fate had woven themselves tight, and whatever was to come would resonate through the ages, leaving behind echoes that would ripple long after the storm had passed. In that moment, I understood, we were not merely observers, but participants in a story larger than ourselves, one that would never truly end but would reverberate through the tapestry of existence. The tension hung in the air, raw and electric, and as I braced for the inevitable, I knew that the journey would continue, spiraling through the shadows of history, forever unyielding, forever alive.